Time Thursday afternoon, about 9 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. A Thursday that kind of feels like a Monday. I have a proposition. Maybe I'll write up a bill for our local legislators. Between like December 23rd and January 5th, we just do away with days because it's Thursday. It feels like Monday. Last night was Wednesday. It felt like Sunday. It's weird. Nothing's real this time of year. The days run together, but feels like a Monday, but only 2 days left in the work week. Hopefully you're still off work, enjoying some downtime with your family and friends. But if you're back on the grind like we are, every day of the Super Bowl here on the program, it's good to have you with us. Happy New Year. We only have one more day to say Happy New Year. Remember, we follow the gospel of Larry David. I am a believer. I'm holding my hand to the square on this program. He gives you until January 3rd to wish people Happy New Year. So one more day. Tomorrow's the last day. Then it's done. Then it's on to 2025. We are moments away from kickoff in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl, Georgia and Notre Dame. I'm going to do my best to stay on task. Sometimes during drive time, you have some really good games that are being played, like baseball playoffs at times. And we have it on the television. I'm going to do my best not to give you play-by-play while we do the show, but we will keep you up to date on a massive game in a city that suffered a horrible, horrible tragedy we all woke up to on New Year's Day. So the game was moved, obviously not near the most important factor of that entire dynamic, but they are about to kick off in New Orleans, the site of Utah's win over Alabama back in 2009. I was there, one of the coolest experiences I've had as a media member. Speaking of Utah football, the latest on the transfer portal, the latest on all things Utes. Since you and I last spoke, some, let's see, how shall I say, incendiary accusations about Brigham Young and recruiting Utah football players. Let me be clear, I cannot corroborate any of that. I'm not an investigative reporter. In fact, the way I try to do this show is more diagnosis instead of prognostication, because people that believe they can predict sports, like we're not Biff with the Sports Almanac from Back to the Future. Was that 3? I think 3. So it's ridiculous. It's an exercise of futility to try to actually predict how this stuff is going to go. So I'm more of a reactionary diagnosis, not prognosticator. And the fact of the matter is Keanu Tadavasa is headed to Provo, and he's going to play really well for Kalani and that staff, and it's a big loss for Utah, no matter who you want to blame. But there is this permeating sense of anxiety about the state of the Utah Athletic Department, with the basketball team getting their doors blown off in the Big 12 opener, and simply a lot of question marks about the future of the football team. So we'll get into the latest with the college football stuff on the show. Should BYU have received an invite to the CFP after a pretty underwhelming performance by SMU, a team that BYU beat? And BYU's resume certainly indicates there would have been an argument for it. Now, all the data we have is they weren't really in consideration. Is that fair? And it's not because people hate BYU. Stop it. Oh, the whole inferiority complex is so exhausting. It's not because of that. But I think it's clear to say that something's broken. If you're a fan of the Oregon Ducks and you're mad today, I believe that you have every right to be. Now, Ohio State. A lot of people believe who cover college football, Ohio State has the best personnel in the game. Ryan Day has come under a lot of fire, but they march on after an overwhelming start and then a really interesting back and forth against the Oregon Ducks yesterday. So, of course, college football top of mind. The final week of the regular season in the NFL does not get started tonight, despite Thursday night football typically being a part of the staple. It will begin Saturday with a doubleheader. You're going to see the Browns and the Ravens on ABC and ESPN, and then ESPN has both games. The later game is going to be the Bengals and the Steelers. So a lot at stake on that second game, not so much with the first. The Browns obviously have been eliminated. Ravens high speed out of the postseason. Then a good Sunday slate with several interesting dynamics that ends with an absolute heavyweight punch-for-punch matchup in Detroit at Ford Field. That's the Vikings and the Lions. Detroit's getting 3 points at home as of now. So pro football ahead. Utah Jazz got smoked at MSG, as they are wont to do this year. It was actually a decent start. They will spend the weekend in Florida as they take on the Heat coming up on Saturday. And then they're going to take on, I believe it's the Magic before they come back home. Yes, that's right. They're at Orlando on Sunday. So it's Miami Saturday, Orlando Sunday Then they're back home. We welcome in an old friend next week. That is Quinn Snyder and the Atlanta Hawks before the aforementioned Miami Heat roll into town on Thursday. A little bit of everything going on right now. We have a lot to get to on the show with a good guest list. We'll start things off with our guy, Timmy Good Time Bontemps from ESPN. Taller in person than you would think. Tim does a great job covering the NBA for ESPN, does their Straw MVP poll that this time of year gets a lot of interest. You know, we kind of always do this thing in pro basketball where most people believe the All-Star break is like officially halfway home. It's not. I mean, if you include the calendar for teams that make a deep postseason run, technically, yes. But we're over 30 games for most teams played. 34, I think, is the peak. I think the Mavs have played the most games so far. So we're inching closer and closer to having a halfway regular season data point at our disposal. And, of course, the trade deadline is going to be coming our way in about a month and a half, about 6 weeks-ish from right now. A lot of conversation about the Jazz and whether or not they're going to be active. So we'll bring in Tim today. And then live in Florida, if we can get Craig to answer his phone on the beach with a little drink and an umbrella, Craig Bolerjack, the TV voice of the Utah Jazz, will roll by in the 3 o'clock hour. We'll continue our big show, big hour, as we do every Thursday with Gordon Monson. Stormy Bonatoni stops by. I will never forget how to pronounce her last name because she joined our show a couple of years ago, and I can't even tell you how badly I botched it, and it was so embarrassing. I will say a lot of broadcasters get names wrong, but I feel like once I botch it, I try my best not to do it again. So Stormy will stop by today, and it is Bonatoni. Stormy Bonatoni to talk some college football. Do a little sports court on a Thursday as well. So Tim Bontemps, Craig Bolerjack, Gordon Monson, Stormy Bonatoni, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners. And that guy who was alive, what the hell have you been doing over the past 48 hours? You, ran a marathon and biked 1,000 miles? What?
I don't know about 1,000.
Well, what have you been doing? I get texts like, is he going to live through this? What are you?
People are asking you about that?
3 text messages like, is your boy okay? Then I pull up your IG and, all right, what have you been doing over the past 48 hours?
I mean, it's more over the past 365 days. It's nothing crazy. I set a distance goal for myself every year, both on my bike, on my feet, and I procrastinated the last month of the year. Obviously, holidays and whatnot, got behind on it. So on December 31st, I had 26.3 miles, and that was on the feet. And then, I don't know, like 60, 70 something on the bike remaining. So I stomped out a really slow, painful marathon and pedaled away for the remainder of 2024.
You ran 23 miles and biked 67?
26.
In how long?
This was like over the course of the last 48 hours of the year, but the marathon was yesterday.
I stretched yesterday.
Good for you.
Yeah, I mean you got to stay limber.
I mean,
proud of you.
Yeah. Sorry, not yesterday, December 31st.
All right.
And then yesterday, I literally did not move. I was watching football and sitting on my couch all day.
All right, fair enough. Well, Porter is alive. He is good. He is with us. Our first guest will be Tim Bontemps on this Thursday show. But before we get to Tim, courtesy of our good friends at Standard Restaurant Supply, it's your tailgate headquarters. Get everything you need to make your tailgate epic. Stop by their location at 3500 Southwest Temple or online at standardrestaurant.com. It is time now for your opening tip. Sugar Bowl going on right now. As I referenced, we will do our best not to get too distracted so we can do the radio show without essentially spoiling anything for you guys. Of course, this game was supposed to be played on New Year's Day. Horrific, tragic situation in New Orleans that we all woke up to. And so the game was moved, and obviously not near the most important part of that entire horrific situation, but it is going on right now. And so we'll keep you up to date. College football playoff bracket continues to unfold. It's been interesting to follow this because I think from a local standpoint, if you are a BYU fan, I do feel you when you talk about whether or not you should have gained access or entrance to this 12-team field. Now, I do. It's not necessarily just the L's for BYU. I do think it was when they occurred late in the season, losing 2 of your final 3. And that Kansas loss is certainly always going to stick in the craw. Because I think, as I've been retrospective about this and listened to some takes and read some stuff historically, this is one of the top 5 seasons in BYU history. Certainly juxtaposed to preseason expectations when they were picked to finish 13 in the conference and Vegas had their over-under at 4.5 wins. It's why I've said over the past couple of weeks, I don't mean this as a knock, it's just my opinion, that Utah being the overwhelming preseason favorite to win the Big 12, picked by the media, picked by Las Vegas, and stumbling to a 2-7 conference record and not even going to a bowl game, I think it's the worst year Kyle's ever had. And I believe he feels the same way. I think that's one of the reasons why he's coming back. On the other side, because there were really no expectations for Brigham Young, and they ended up not just, really having a good regular season with 7-2 in conference, 11-2 overall, beating Colorado in the way they did, how they did, as overwhelming as that was, is one of the best non-CFP bowl wins, period. And that was their 8th conference opponent they were able to beat because they did not play the Buffs during the regular season. So watching a lot of these games unfold, it has become pretty clear that even though college football is such an incredible product and watching the games is still so much fun, it's amazing how – and look, this is not anything new. BCS, 4-team situation. What's the formula? What is the committee value? Every year, no matter what the format is, there is a tremendous amount of wailing and gnashing of teeth about how they crown their national champ. And I certainly don't have any answers today. I have opinions on what they should or should not do, but it does leave a lot of conversation and debate about the current format of the sport and what should they lean into and how do they solve it. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but how many times do you really hear a ton of belly aching about what the NFL does to crown their champ? And this has just been my thing for years. It will continue to be my thing ever since the Supreme Court threw the NCAA out and said, you are a serial antitrust violator. Go figure it out. And then NIL became a reality and the transfer portal became the reality. On that day, I said on this show, there's one solution, and it is moving towards a pro model. And every time I hear a debate about something about college football that is broken, I land on the same space where the NFL model, you don't hear a ton of complaints about how they crown their champ, how they seed their tournament. I mean, outside of the fact that some people don't love the divisions because ultimately, you could win your division with 8 wins and get in, and so some people don't love that. But ultimately, the divisions, win your conference, go to the Super Bowl, boom, Super Bowl winner is the deserving champ. You don't hear the same type of debate that you do about the college football format. And I was listening to Joel Klatt, and I like Joel a lot. We've efforted him a couple of times to get on the show. He's a big Utah football fan. And Joel's idea is interesting. You make the Rose Bowl the college version of the Super Bowl. Because I think it's safe to say it feels like it's a consensus, and maybe our friends down south wouldn't necessarily agree with this, but most people who have been to a tremendous amount of big college football venues and big college football bowl games believe that it's not close, and the Rose Bowl is the best venue for college football. It's the best surrounding and atmosphere for college football, and it certainly is the game that seems to hold the most cachet. That's why they call it the granddaddy of them all. Do you really give a rip about the Peach Bowl? I mean, around here we have good memories of a Sugar Bowl win against Bama, a Fiesta Bowl win against Pitt, but the Sugar, the Fiesta, the Peach, whatever it is, it doesn't carry the same weight as when you hear, oh, man, we made the Rose Bowl. It's why back-to-back opportunities for Ute fans to make that trek to Pasadena will be lifetime memories. And ultimately right now, I know you're feeling a little bit down in the dumps, but don't forget, we are a market here with a football program that just a couple of years ago was in the Rose Bowl for the second straight year. Let's not be so quick to forget. So do you format college football the very same way that you format the NFL? As I will continue to say, the answer for me is emphatically yes, for several reasons, most of which are related to the business of the sport, because you do have to get that settled in. And I know longtime diehard fans of college football hate the fact that money is now permeated throughout the course of this element of sport that we all loved so much because it was quote-unquote pure. Now, I'll remind you that the quote-unquote pure situation was making a lot of old crusty dudes rich behind the scenes, which is why They invented language to co-opt our thoughts to distract us from what was going on, which is building a business on the backs of employees they didn't pay. And those employees should be paid. But unless you have regulation and unless you have the ability to kind of corral the business of the sport, the product itself will continue to suffer in a way that at some point may turn some people off. The good news is we're not there yet because the ratings for all these games continue to go through the roof. The bad news is if you continue to ignore the things that I think are plaguing the product, namely how you crown a national champ, and namely the path that we get to that ultimate culmination of the best team in college football, at some point people are going to tap out. I mean, for years and years and years, what do we hear about the NFL? The NFL's in trouble because of concussions. The NFL's in trouble because these guys are bad dudes off the field. Both things are true. You're still watching, right? And so every time I get into this space of believing there's something up with college football, I look at the ratings. They will send me their profit and loss statement. I'll say, okay, good job. But as I've witnessed the news cycle over the past 24 hours, it does seem like it is the same situation about people upset that the wrong teams got in, people upset that, and like I said to start the show, if you're an Oregon Duck fan today and you're mad and you're pissed, I feel you. Your reward for being the best team in college football was playing potentially the most talented team in college football the first time you had a chance to play a playoff game. That's bogus. The seeding was bad. The format was bad. Now, we'll see ultimately who makes their way through into the CFP final. But what if that was the Rose Bowl? Is the Rose Bowl the college football answer to the Super Bowl, whatever that destination is for the biggest game in any sport? The Rose Bowl turns into college football Super Bowl. You get some divisions, you get conferences, and boom, you simply follow the pro model. And until I hear a argument that dissuades me from this hill that I seem to have really bought real estate on, I'm going to stay with it. Like I've heard that university presidents and administrators don't want to move into some sort of pro model because they don't want their players to be employees. Tough luck. Tough luck. Sorry, figure it out. You have employees at the school. You can pay taxes. You got smart people that can figure it out. And there should be ways to continue to capture some of the revenue that's brought in by this popular sport to support your other sports. You can find a way through that. You're smart people. It's why you're running our institutions across the country. All right, we're back to college football in a little bit, but coming up on the other side, one of my favorites to talk basketball with, Timmy Good Time Bontemps from ESPN on a Thursday that feels like a Monday. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. So I don't know if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was technically last night, but it was on television last night. And we have good news. So today the bumps will strictly be from that group.
Okay.
And it includes Dave and Tribe. That's it's 90% of what we need.
Who else?
Cher.
Should I bring up the list?
Dionne Warwick, Jimmy Buffett, little Peter Frampton. There are a lot of options for you to run with today.
Okay. Yeah, that's Dave and Tribe will make you happy, and then I'll find some obscure stuff too.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. All right, we're back to college football in a moment, but I always enjoy when our next guest can take some time because he's very busy, he's very important. Tim Bontemps, ESPN on a Thursday. Tim, Happy New Year, buddy. How we doing?
Happy New Year to you, Spence. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm well. I appreciate the time. It's been interesting, and this is the first time we've been able to catch up in a number of months, I believe, so I appreciate the time. But there are two ways to look at this thing with the Jazz this year. And, one way is simply, man, they're not good. They're hard to watch. They're not winning games. And the other way is they're kind of finally approaching this thing, in my opinion, the right way. While they're losing games, they're playing pretty competitively. We are seeing some interesting storylines emerge. Where do you fall right now as far as what the Jazz are trying to accomplish this season, Tim?
I mean, what the Jazz are trying to accomplish is get higher than the 8th or 9th pick in the draft, and they're succeeding. And that the last few years, last couple of years, Will Hardy's a tremendous coach, and with them and Larry Markkinen and some vets, they were able to win, enough games to make it hard to jump up into the top 5. And when you look at this draft class this year in particular, and the one next year, if you can be in the top 5 of the draft, you got a chance to get the kind of foundational franchise player that you really need to have if you're going to have a chance to win big. So obviously it's going to be a long year from a wins and losses standpoint, but like you said, the young guys are playing. The games have been fairly competitive, especially lately, or at least, in recent weeks, the last couple of games, not so much. And, ultimately, if it lines up with Utah getting Cooper Flagg or Nolan Traore or Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey or one of these guys at the top of the draft, that would have been, any one of them would have been the number 1 pick in this year's draft, then, that's seen this mission accomplished, and this team will, have the piece they'll hopefully, be building around as a team they hope will be a championship contender in a few years.
All right, we're going to reset. Porter, why don't you disconnect from Tim? Because I can't, if that's sounding like that in my ears, yeah, let's see. Can we set him loose? Because I mean, all right, we're going to catch a quick break. We're going to see if we can get Tim on. So stay tuned. All right, technical difficulties happens in live radio from time to time, but I think we're back with our guy, Tim Bontemps. Timmy, are you there, bud?
I am, hopefully.
There we go. No, we got you loud and clear, loud and clear. So let's just reset a little bit because we weren't able to get your entire answer on the Jazz. So obviously around here, basketball fans are used to watching more often than not winning basketball played with precision, played with competitiveness, and for the third straight year, it's a team that's not playing for anything special. But in my estimation, they are finally approaching this the right way, where they're not waiting until February to break it down. So I guess what I'll ask you is, what would you say to Jazz fans about the hope of how this long game, and that's what it's going to be, could potentially turn out?
I would say to watch a lot of college games and to watch a lot of Duke games and a lot of Rutgers games and a lot of Baylor games and to watch the top players in this draft, because that's what this season is about. It's about trying to position yourself to get one of the top 4 or 5 picks in this draft and to get one of these guys that would have been the number 1 pick in this past year's draft if any one of them had been eligible to be in the draft. So I think that's really what fans should be focused on is looking at those guys. Because, again, like we saw, like you said, the last couple of years, Will's a great coach. If you give him some decent vets, like he's going to win enough games that it's going to be hard without getting a lot of luck to jump way up in the lottery. So, I mean, if we're being honest, the tools are taken out of the toolbox for the most part. And so now the Jazz are playing a bunch of young guys. They're losing a lot of games. Those guys are getting some experience, and the hope for the Jazz will be it'll result in a very high pick and what's as loaded a draft as we've seen in a generation.
It's funny, Tim, as this business has kind of evolved and unfolded, there are so many people that do niche things really well. So I kind of rely on guys that scout full time and guys that do what they do as far as analyzing the college game to learn about these players in a way that a lot of us that have to do other things just don't. So I know you're not on the ground at Duke every night, but since it's been a minute and a lot of Jazz fans around here hoping that Cooper Flagg is the prize of this really tough, long year, what are you hearing about the type of NBA player, guys that really dig into this, think that Cooper could be when he's fully baked?
I mean, I think the floor for him, like the absolute floor, is to be a modern-day version of Andrei Kirilenko. And that's I think that's frankly, a pretty low-end outcome for his skill set. And when you're saying that the floor for a guy is to be, one of the best defensive players in the league, a 4 or 5 position defender who can handle the ball, who can make plays, who can score, like that's an awfully good player, right? And the high end is like you're talking about a, MVP candidate type of player who's plays with relentless intensity, is a 6'10" guy who can do stuff with the ball, who can, is not afraid to compete with anybody. We saw him go toe-to-toe with guys at Team USA camp and come away with people being extremely impressed by him. And he's exactly the kind of person and personality that I think fans would instantly gravitate toward as a two-way player and who, I'd be quite happy to be building for a long time. So, I mean, there's a reason why he's been talked about for a couple of years. He's an incredibly intriguing player. And, there's a reason why, it's not just him. It's, it is the 2 guys at Rutgers, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. It's Nolan Traore, the French guard. It's, VJ Edgecombe, who was really impressed with the Bahamian national team and is playing for Baylor this year. I mean, literally all those guys would have been the number 1 pick in this year's draft. So, I mean, that tells you the strength of this draft in comparison, and it's why the Jazz and several other teams are pretty, dead focused on trying to have as good a positioning in that draft class as they can.
Another interesting story that's unfolded here over the past, about month and a half, actually a little bit longer than that, but it did become official on your network. And I very much enjoyed Stephen A. Smith's reaction sitting across from AJ DeBanza when AJ said BYU. And a lot of people were really, really surprised. And, since the announcement, he played a year of high school ball here, so a lot of people know him. But he's played in some tournaments, and, now you cannot escape a highlight here or there. And from what I'm reading, a lot of people believe AJ might be the best prospect across 3 different classes because he did reclassify. Now, the connection that seems to have been drawn between some BYU basketball fans and Ryan Smith, a BYU booster and the owner of the Jazz, that it's some sort of farm system. That's not how it works. If somebody has a draft pick that's ahead of the Jazz and they want to draft A.J. DeBanza, they're going to be able to do that. But I wonder, Tim, from your vantage point, if you think there is any advantage to Ryan being a major booster and helping bankroll BYU basketball's program that's really shot up a bunch of levels with the best player in the country next year. Is there any advantage for Ryan to do this as it pertains to how he's trying to build his pro team?
I mean, it would be a lot more advantageous if we went back 50, 60 years and there were territorial rights that you had the ability to draft a player who was in your backyard. If that was the case, then yes, it would make a lot of sense, and maybe the Jazz could guarantee themselves Cooper Flagg and AJ and several other players if they wanted to. But yeah, look, I mean, I don't think there's a real tangible benefit on a day-to-day basis from it, other than that, it's just the more that if BYU becomes a consistent national power from a basketball standpoint, instead of just being a good, solid program like it has been for a long time, there's no harm in having guys out in the neighborhood and being, around the franchise and in the same zip code as it over an extended period of time. Like, I don't think there's any negative thing to that, but it's not like the Charlotte Hornets and Atlanta Hawks are more attractive to teams because a lot of guys have gone to Duke. You know what I mean? So I don't think it does a lot, other than it just raises the profile of Utah basketball in general, which, I think if you're a basketball fan in the city and the state, is a good thing.
All right, we won't do a lot. We won't do a ton more on the Jazz because it is what it is. But I will ask you one more thing, because we are 6 weeks or so from the trade deadline. And look, man, I'll eat a little crow. I'm not a big John Collins guy. This does feel a little bit like a Sharif Abdul-Rahim 20-10 for the Vancouver Grizzlies back in the day. But he is flirting with like a 50, 40, 90 season. He missed a few free throws, so he's back down to 87%. So you've got guys like John Collins. Colin Sexton's been pretty good as of late, and he's a 20-point per game guy in Cleveland once upon a time. The league knows him. I think they waited too long to trade Clarkson, but we've seen a few moments. I mean, look, you know the deal. There are some vets on the roster that might help a team that's trying to win. You think they're active at all prior to the trade deadline come next month?
I mean, I'm sure if they can get value for players, they'll be in the market to do so. I do think it will be difficult to trade John, despite the way he has played, because of how much money he's making, just because I think it's going to be very hard for anybody making north of $20 million to get moved anywhere because of the restrictions in place because of the new CBA and the amount of money that teams have bumping up against these new aprons and the hard caps that come with them. So, but both Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson are in the, $10 to $20 million range of player that, we've already seen Dorian Finney-Smith and Dennis Schroeder change teams. And I think that's sort of the phylum of player that you're going to see change teams most predominantly over the next month. So, if they can get value for those guys, I'm sure they'll look at it. But, I think this is as much about, making sure those young guys are playing and setting up things for the future than I think particularly going out and trying to acquire anybody that's going to come in and be some impact player in the long term in Utah.
So, one of the other weird things, you and I have talked about this before, and there are different reasons for each case. Gordon Hayward gets hurt. Darren Williams never really kind of found his way with the New Jersey Nets. Booz couldn't stay healthy. A lot of players have left here and not necessarily played the way they did while they were here. Donovan's been the exception, and it feels like this might be his level up moment. They make a coaching change. And look, I think like everybody else, I still am in a spot. And I think Donovan himself admits this. He has questions to answer come spring. He has questions to answer come playoff time. But they're 29-4. And the Jazz were back there recently, so I've caught a couple of games to watch Donovan where I feel like he's growing up. I feel like he's maturing. The numbers are about what they've always been, but Kenny Atkinson has kind of expanded that rotation. Are you ready to say today that obviously it's the Celtics? Vegas tells us behind Boston it's New York. But how impressed, I guess I'll ask, have you been with what Kenny Atkinson has done with the Cavs and Donovan specifically?
I mean, I've been very impressed with the Cavs and very impressed with the way Donovan has, embraced bringing these young guys along. I think the question still remains, is this team better than those Jazz teams, or is this just a version of Jazz East? And I don't think we're really going to know the answer to that until the spring and to see how things go in the playoffs, to your point. But that, that some of that is because we just have to see if this team can take that next step. But I do think that, when you look at this roster, I would say this roster is younger, obviously, overall than that Jazz team was. And I do think it's more versatile overall than that Jazz team was. Like, they don't have, obviously, for all of Rudy's gifts, when you have Rudy Gobert, you have to sort of play a specific way, right? And because they had Rudy, the Jazz front office, went out and got a bunch of guys who could really fill it up from the perimeter, but we're also not as strong defensively, and therefore they could be taken advantage of at times in the playoffs, especially when they had some injuries. So, I am curious to see if we're just seeing another example of whether it's that Jazz team or the Hawks team with Mike Budenholzer, 8 or 10 years ago, which won 60 games, these really high level, teams that have tremendous regular seasons and max out. And then we get to the playoffs and they're not quite able to be at the same level as their opponents. I think time will tell if that's the case. I do think Evan Mobley's emergence and taking a true step forward has really been a significant thing for them, which is a potential real difference maker down the road. I do have questions about their ability to defend elite wing players. If you look at the Cavs roster, there's not a ton of options for them to try to slow down, say, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown at the same time, or the guys on the Knicks, or, Damian Lillard, or some of these other perimeter stars on these other teams. So we'll see how they can manage that. But look, like you said, they're on pace right now to win 72 games. They're obliterating everybody. They've got a net rating, I think, of 12, one of the 4 or 5 best in the history of the league if it holds up till the end of the year. I mean, we're talking about a team that's putting up an all-time great regular season resume. And if you go back 10 years ago, when Steve Kerr got to Golden State, nobody saw Golden State coming as a team that was going to win a title, and they just absolutely exploded into a supernova overnight with a coaching change and some stylistic tweets. And if you tell me that, we're sitting here 6 months from now and the Cavs are in the finals and this continues all the way to the spring, that's the team I would point back to and say, if there is a precedent for this, it's what happened here in the Bay 10 years ago, and we could be seeing it again in Cleveland.
You referenced Rudy, and this is the year, as you know, that the draft capital that the Utah Jazz were able to obtain in exchange for Gobert and Mitchell will start to convey. Unfortunately, it looks like that Cavs pick might be the worst pick in the first round. But the T-Wolf struggle, Tim, has been kind of interesting to follow around here. I mean, look, with the landscape of the issues that the Pelicans have run into with injuries, the Blazers and the Jazz are horrible. We'll see what happens with the Kings. I have a hard – and look, San Antonio is fun. Will they keep winning? I have a hard time believing that Minnesota is going to drop out of the thing altogether. But that's a pick the Jazz are hoping that looks a little bit better this year than they thought that it would prior to. How real do you think the mediocre play has been from the Timberwolves, and do you think they'll turn it around second half of the year?
I mean, I think they'll play better to a degree, but, look, the problem the Timberwolves have had is – you go back a couple of years ago, the team changed when they got Mike Conley, right? And Mike Conley playing as a high level point guard who could set these guys up and get them into offense and have the ball moving around, was the thing that sort of leveled up that team into being a team that won 55 games last year, 56 games last year. Mike Conley now has taken a bit of a step back. He looks his age, and the Wolves have not really been able to find a fix for that. And, combination of Ant and Julius Randle, ball stopping the ball a lot has made the offense look pretty clunky. So, I think Dante DiVincenzo's starting to get comfortable. He looks like he's over some of the back stuff he was dealing with. I think he'll hit some more shots. Some of their other guys are going to hit some more shots. But, I do think that the offense is a concern. And if they're not able to get some more efficient play at that end and some more of the ball movement and flow that they had last year, I don't think the Wolves are missing the playoffs either. But, You could be talking about a pick that instead of being in the mid to late 20s like it looked like a year ago, might be in the mid to late teens. And if you're in the mid to late teens in this draft, that's a pretty decent pick. So, certainly if you're a Jazz fan, I think you're rooting for the Wolves to be in the play-in mix. And then, who knows? Maybe they have a bad week and miss the playoffs or whatever. But either way, I do think that pick's going to look a lot better than we expected it to 6 months ago.
All right, Tim, before I set you loose, a lot of conversation prior to the year, certainly about the depth out west and teams out east that made some additions, New York with Bridges and Philly with Paul George. And Vegas tells us if you are going to put any money on any team, don't overthink it, Celtics Thunder, period. We are high speed ahead to that matchup. They're the overwhelming favorite in both conferences. Do you believe we are heading towards that matchup, period? And if not, which team in either conference can kind of derail either of those two?
I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I think the Celtics, if healthy, are clearly the best team in the East. And the Thunder, to me, to this point, have shown to be the best team in the West. Now, who knows with injuries, right? Like if Shea gets hurt in the first round of the playoffs, the Thunder are going to be cooked. And, the Celtics have had a bunch of injuries to their guys over the last couple months. And, if they're missing Kristaps Porzingis in the playoffs like they were last year, beating this Cavs team is going to be a different animal, or beating this Knicks team potentially, which is, ripped off a bunch of wins in a row and has a really interesting game tonight in Oklahoma City against the Thunder, or tomorrow night, I should say, against the Thunder. Like, that's another team that they might not be able to beat if they're not at full strength. But, yeah, I mean, look, I think those are the two teams that you should be penciling in right now. And, again, like we just talked about, if you're picking somebody else, you have to say that the team that's on pace to win 72 games has to be the threat to knock on the door and potentially crash that party. And, next week I'll be at Cavs Thunder in Cleveland. They then play the following week in Oklahoma City. And those, I think, will be two really interesting games to see how this Cavs team looks in and how they look going up against, obviously, an incredible defensive team, one with a ton of, perimeter ball hawks that can go at Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and give them trouble. So, yeah, I mean, but overall, if you ask me to pick two teams right now, I'm picking Celtics Thunder. I'm not thinking too hard about it. That's been my belief since before the season started. And for as great as the Cavs have been, I have not really seen anything to take me off the fact that if they're playing far.
All right, Tim, I appreciate the time, man. Again, Happy New Year. Thanks so much. Keep up the great work, okay?
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me, and talk to you soon.
All right, the great Tim Bontemps from ESPN covers the league, has for a long time at a very high level. Get him on Twitter, just his name, at Tim Bontemps. Appreciate the patience with some of the technical difficulties, but we made it through. It's all that matters. Sugar Bowl, second quarter, 12-18 left. It is scoreless. Georgia has the ball, but they were just stopped on a third down. Looks like they might have a field goal opportunity. Of course, this game delayed as a result of the tragedy that took place down in New Orleans. We'll keep you up to date on this. We'll get to some more college football later on. Stormy Buonantony is going to stop by. I always appreciate her time. And coming up next, we go to Florida. We're going to talk a little hoop, maybe a little football with Craig Bolerjack. Gordon Monson stops by. We'll do some local college football with Gordo. But Timmy Bontemps is your NBA Daily Assist today. That's brought to you by About Time Pub, which is Utah's premier sports bar. Amazing food, killer cocktails. Make About Time your place for sports or even brunch. All food is made from scratch, and they've got new mocktails for those of you that don't partake in alcohol. More TVs than tables. All About Time TVs have their own receiver. They have all the games going on live with free high-speed Wi-Fi, so you can go, quote, work from home at About Time Pub. Of course, during the spring season, keep About Time in mind for any work gatherings. They have locations in Ogden, Layton, West Valley, West Jordan, Sandy, Tooele, Harriman, Bluffdale, Lehigh, and Vineyard. Utah Sports Bar, celebrating their 15-year anniversary. They have in-house smoked wings, fresh made from scratch food. Brunch is available on the weekends from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., including a build-your-own Bloody Mary bar. They show every UFC event, no cover charge, or home for pretty much any sport you want. More information can be found at abouttimepub.com. All right, 1 hour down, 3 hours to go on this Thursday afternoon. Craig Bolerjack live, I believe, from South Beach. Joins us coming up next right here on ESPN 700. Yeah, this works. Ozzy Osbourne, inducted. What was the ceremony last night, or was it only on television last night? I honestly don't know.
I'll be honest, I have no idea. Time is a construct, Spence.
Well, yeah, when you bike 80 miles and run 30 in like 20 hours.
Actually, that time wasn't a construct then. I had to get done before midnight, but understood.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction last night. It was on television. Ozzy was inducted. My man's barely hanging in. Shout out to Ozzy. So they rolled him out on stage, and it was a rough look. All right, I believe we're going live to South Beach, where maybe poolside, maybe on a beach, feet up, shirt off, little drink in hand with a umbrella potentially is where we find our guy Craig Bowler. Bowler, am I close to setting the scene?
Maybe an hour from now. I just this minute walked in the room. So I sat down and, dialed you up, and here I am. But we finally made it out of New York, cold, 29 degrees, maybe 15 last night, and a lot of rain on New Year's Eve. And what do you know, 72. Can't beat that.
That a guy. That has to be good for the soul, isn't it? I mean, you guys travel so much, and you get off the plane in so many cold weather cities. When you get off the plane in South Beach, it has to be good for the soul a little bit, yeah?
Yeah, you just stand there and look and go, man, that feels good. That feels really good, And then you play a Crazy Train coming in, kind of our life right now. But, the Ozzy got in. I didn't see the show, obviously, but I can just imagine that was, as you just said, kind of a bad moment. But congrats. I mean, the guy's been around forever.
For sure. Hall of Famer, no doubt. We'll get to the Jazz in a moment. It's an interesting time in the landscape of college football, Craig. And for our listeners, I always want to bring the context that for years and years and years, you called some of the biggest college football games around. I mean, I can remember listening to you and watching broadcasts and thinking that actually was going to be your future at some point. We've talked about it. We don't have to go there. But you're uniquely qualified to talk about why, for some reason, this sport has never been able to land on a format that seems to fairly and accurately crown a college football national champ. Now, I was listening to your buddy Joel Klatt earlier today. He had an interesting idea. He said, make the Rose Bowl the Super Bowl of college football. So it seems like most people, and you included, that travel the country calling college football believe that the Rose Bowl is the best spot to have a college football game in. Best surrounding, granddaddy of them all. The format is one thing, but I do believe as we move further ahead to a pro model, nobody complains about the way the NFL crowns their champ, but everybody complains about the way college football crowns their champ. Do you have any thoughts on the current format, and what do you think about Klatt's kind of proposal, make the Rose Bowl the Super Bowl?
No, I've always thought that the bowl games, the ones when I was first in the business on New Year's Day, they all counted as the Rose, the Sugar, the Orange, and the Fiesta. I mean, I was able to call several, not of those high-level games, but the Gator, the Humanitarian Bowl, which is now the Idaho Potato Bowl, I do believe, up in Boise, called the Sun Bowl, several other bowls, Armed Forces. They've all changed names, by the way. The Weed Whacker Bowl. How about that? But I think there has to be a crowning moment, not to almost sound like Nance for a minute, but I think there has to be a centerpiece of where it all ends instead of being kind of put from one spot to another. Here's what the problem is, Spence, money. Here's what the problem is, Spence. It's also each of these bowls believe they should be recognized as the granddaddy or the echelon of college football. In reality, the college football is going to have to make a tough decision and say, no, we're going to end it here, and that's where it should be, right? But it's the money. I don't think they're done with the way that they're realigning the conferences, and I think they still got to get calls right. Ridiculous no call on the targeting yesterday with Texas. I mean, please, and Arizona State. Those are things that have got to change. Because, again, it spoils the effort of what these young guys are trying to do and the coaches and the alums that go along with it, Spence. I don't know what your thought is, but, man, I tell you, if that's the definition of targeting, that's what I've been told throughout my career. That's targeting, plain and simple, but it didn't happen. And of course, that starts to bring doubt into the minds of fans and everyone else included because, oh, this is already pre-planned. It's fixed. I don't need that. We don't need that. We want college football in its purest form if possible. And it's really struggling right now because some lean one way, some lean the other. And what I mean by that is just the NIL and the ridiculous amount of monies that continue to be poured out to grab a player or for them to jump into a portal and make more money as well. So, man, I think it's a fine line college football is walking right now. I love the game, Spence. 13 years at CBS, unbelievable in the South, in the SEC, the Southeastern Conference. I love the Big 12. I love the Pac-12. I got a few Conference USA games in, but there's nothing like college football on a Saturday afternoon. It's kind of religion. The people that travel around the country to follow their team is something to see. You know, they don't get into the stadium. They stay outside and make it a happening. It's a party. It's an experience, and it's a great thing. And I just hope that doesn't ever go away because it's special. It's really special.
I also believe, Craig, that for the most part, college football is meant to be played on college campuses.
Yeah.
You know, so like for instance, let's use Texas as an example. If you're a Texas fan, or if you're, you know, if you're an Ohio State fan, but then we'll hone in on Texas. If you're a Texas fan, in order to watch your team play and see if they're going to win a national championship, you have to go to like Atlanta, back to Dallas, and then if they make it to the final, you're going to have to go back to Atlanta again. Like you're asking some of these fan bases to make three separate road trips to watch their teams play to try to win a national championship. Maybe all of these Texas alum are ballers, but that's thousands of dollars for 3 straight trips to watch your team play. Like that to me is an unfair ask of college fans. And I really believe college football at the end of the day, maybe with the exception of the Rose Bowl being the Super Bowl, as we talked about earlier, should be played on college campuses.
I don't mind that idea. I mean, those stadiums that you just spoke of in Austin on a game day, that's the second largest city in the state of Texas, by the way. And I read today, Kansas State's marching band themselves drove 20 hours just to be at the game. And, you know, that's kind of that's the love of the game. That's college football. Kids decided, let's jump in a van. But, you know, that's a big undertaking, man, to move a couple of 100 students and band equipment 20 hours down the road just so they can attend a bowl game. But the expense is high, as you know. Some teams roll in and obviously make a commitment to have, 30 or so thousand tickets they have to commit to. And if they don't sell them, then they have to pay back the bowl committee, basically the loss of ticket sales. And, you know, a lot of schools, Boise State, for example, I was glad to see them get in, but at the same time, it was costly, I'm sure. I like to see the bottom line of that, Spence, of how much Boise State actually paid and how many fans actually could attend. Because you bring up a great point. You're jumping from one large city to another, and ticket prices are nothing that most college students could even think about trying to afford. So that's another part to me that's bothersome because it really is geared only towards very high-level alums who get first pick because they're in the alumni silver or gold or platinum club, and then the other ones are sold out to corporate America. So it's a tough thing to get just the natural, normal college football fan into a bowl game, and not only one game, but think about if you go all the way and have to triple that up. That's a tough ask.
Yeah, and look, I'm a grown-up. I know that we're not going to get money out of this thing, and I know that's not how the world works. I just feel like the more and more we move towards this neoliberal capitalism takeover of college football, the less and less it looks like the sport that we all loved for a long, long time. And I'm not smart enough to have answers. I probably wouldn't be blabbing behind a microphone for 4 hours every day. It just, before we move on, it does feel like until the business of the sport off the field is corralled, the product will continue to raise questions that hasn't affected the bottom line yet, Craig. But at some point, there may be fans that just tap out of the whole thing. And maybe that does affect the bottom line. I do feel like, point of emphasis number one is to corral what's happening off the field, because it is unequivocally unfair for coaching staff specifically, and maybe I'm speaking through the prism of what Kyle is tasked with right now. Utah football will look entirely different a year from now. And look, they didn't have a good year. Maybe that's okay. But the ability to retain talent even year over year, and, the inability to bring regulation. So if Ryan Smith wanted to pay A.J. Debance $1 billion right now, he could. Nobody can tell him not to. I think point of emphasis right now, Craig, has to be fix this stuff off the field, because the product continues to thrive, even though off the field continues to be completely chaotic.
Well, when you get guys, is it Marshall, the Thundering Herd, who had 29 players into the portal and they had to deny a bowl game because they had no one to play?
Yep.
That's not a good look. First and foremost for college football, but also you feel for the school and the alumni base who supported those young men and the program. So that's where I start first, and what the portal is actually going to do. And let's be real, because everyone has this idea that they're going to really be an NFL, Hall of Famer. I mean, when I had my 1 year stint, and all I ever did in high school was think about, man, I love to play the pros. And you know what? That's every guy's dream. Every woman who wants to play at in the WNBA or some professional sports Spence, that's always a dream. You want to go to the next level. Reality is that most times that's not going to happen. But the ones that are lucky enough to be in a position where you're wanted, it's not any good anymore just to get a 4-year scholarship, by the way, and have your education paid for. That's a thing of the past, because it's basically one and done in most cases in college basketball, for sure. Football, maybe a stick for 2, maybe 3, but in most cases, what's the NIL money? You may make more money, Spence, in the NIL world than you will ever make as a professional. And, I guess that's good for you, but is it good for football? Personally, yeah, great. But is it good for the game? And everyone's probably, they can throw their heads back and say, hey, man, live with it. That's just where we're going. But I don't have to agree with it. I don't think it's good for the game. I don't think it's good for the fans, to be honest, because coaches also, Spence, they are hired to get through a full recruiting class in the old days, okay? And not that long ago, mind you. So a 4-year deal or a 5 was pretty common. Now you can't probably even guarantee a coach can survive 2 years to build a program back to where it wants to be or should be, because you have players coming and going at such a rapid rate you can't keep up with it. What do you think Nick Saban bailed? You know what? Didn't want to have to hassle with trying to convince young men to stay in his program. And they're one of the most powerful programs in college football. But you saw a downslide this year, right? So it's interesting to me that something has to be done quicker than not to formulate a plan of what direction college football is going, what kind of bumpers, guardrails do you put up to protect yourself? I think that's the most important thing. How do they protect themselves from letting this thing get out of hand?
All right, one more college football question, then we'll end with some jazz. I want to tap into your experience with BYU football. And the season that is now behind us ends with 11-2 and a really dominant win over a good Colorado team in the Alamo Bowl. And, when you think about the pedigree and the history of BYU football, the 2001 team always slides under the radar. That was Brandon Dome and Luke Staley. They were really good. So Sark's Cotton Bowl team, they won 14 games. And then it starts and but it starts and ends with 84. Obviously, they won an Natty and they were undefeated. But as you read into this a little bit more, I'm starting to believe this is one of the top 5 seasons in the history of the program. P4 schedule. None of the other teams played a consistent P4 schedule. They were picked to finish 13th in conference. Vegas over-under was 4.5. So I'm not asking you to rank them 1 through 5 or whatever, or 1 through 10, but just kind of your perspective on what Kalani and his staff were able to do.
Well, I think from my perspective, when I did BYU for 10 years, from 86 to 96, I was part of the Detmer run to the Heisman. And there also were names like Jason Buck, Sean Knight, J.C. Von Collin, Tommy Tuipulotu, Lake Mooley, the Bellinis. I mean, it just goes on and on. Now, this team, I think, doesn't have the name recognition of some of those teams in the past, right? The Bosco days. And And even what Jim McMahon was able to do, it wasn't like a household name or even a name around college football per se, but the coach was. And you saw Dion give him a lot of love and gratitude after BYU beat Colorado. But you know what? For a team, Spence, it has to be top 5. And again, some Cougar fans will probably say higher, some will say baloney, lower. But that's what I love about it, because they can discuss and argue and disagree or agree. But this team was the biggest surprise, one of the biggest surprises in college football for me, because they were ranked dead last in the Big 12. There was basically nothing good said about BYU's offense or defense, and the fact that Kalani, even before the first snap was made, Spence, you remember when we were discussing it back in August, this could be a rough year for Kalani. Can he survive it? Instead, he thrived. And this team responded to him. And I think you have to tip your hat to Kalani, the way the players did not let the, let's say, no accolades at the beginning of the season infiltrate their heads, because it can mess you up if you're not really confident of who you are and stay within this group that you build. And I think Kalani gets a lot of credit for making that happen. They were able to block out all the negatives. They won early. They were opportunistic. They had that 3-minute run against Kansas State, which I thought was probably the game that launched them. Not just because it's my alma mater, but because they were opportunistic. They were more physical and athletic than anyone thought, and they proved it to themselves that night. And I think that game really jumped them ahead to where they finished. I really do.
Well said. All right, a couple of minutes left. Let's do a little jazz here. And let me start with potentially more of a big picture topic. We're 5 weeks away ish from the trade deadline as of today. And we passed the deadline in mid-December, where now 89% of the league is eligible to be traded. And, you know, we'll kind of get to the ebbs and flows of what we've seen lately, because I actually do think there have been some good things, even though there are losses, which I perceive to be best case scenario. But you travel with a team. Are you sensing any, this is kind of that time of year where if a vet knows that he could potentially, it's one of the wildest things about pro sports, where you could wake up, get a phone call and say, you live in Detroit now. Are you sensing any anxiety around the team that maybe there's some movement to be had prior to the deadline in about 5 weeks?
You know what? You can get off a bus in Miami and wonder who's on that bus or who's now going off into an Uber to the airport on the other side of the airport and trying to jump a plane someplace else. You know, Spence, I still think this club is still pretty classy in the sense of how they handle it. The young guys are still wide-eyed, but the veterans, I think, understood from the get-go what basically may or may not happen. John Collins has had a nice year despite the hip injury that he's had. JC is just still doing JC type of things. Sexton has had a nice run. So the vets, I think, understand. I've talked to Colin a couple of times. He's having a blast. I think he's comfortable in his own skin. And what I mean by that is I think he's got a really good relationship with Will Hardy and accepts his coaching. Because Will's been tough on him about pulling the reins back. And we've seen some improvement, but still the biggest issue with this team is turnovers, and it comes in bunches, as you know. There's been some incredible quarters of basketball played, and then a 4 to 5 minute span where you go, wow, what happened? And they have trouble with pressure in the backcourt. Keontae, I think, is trying obviously to rectify that. Sexton as well, Isaiah Collier. But, you know, Spence, anything could happen. I think for the Jazz, the book's wide open. Now, I don't know. I'm only speaking from my chair. I have to say that because it's my opinion, no one else's. But I think there's so many options the Jazz could go to try to better themselves with draft selection. And, you know, what we saw the last 2 years, you and I have talked with Gordo about it, is, you know, come trade deadline, they've let some good players go. Fontecchio, Kelly Olynyk, Ochai Agbaji, all of a sudden seems to have found a home in Toronto. So, you know, you're going to probably see a player or two moved if the price is right. I don't think Danny Fire sells anything. I just don't think that's his way. But I just would say to Jazz fans, don't be surprised because we've kind of been through it before, because minutes have to be played, Spence. The bottom line is Cody Williams is going to – he exploded last night in the G League. He had played 9 games prior. and with the Stars, and then comes back and gets a taste of what the NBA is, and goes back and hopefully comes back and understands what it takes to play in this league, man. It's big boy league, and you've got to be physical. And I think Keontae's learned that. Walker has blossomed in his third year. And you think Isaiah as a rookie, Sensabaugh shows some signs as well, and Johnny Juzang, what's Filipowski all about? The only way we're going to be able to have that discussion, Spence, if they play. And it's minutes, not in the G League per se, but in the NBA, where the Jazz will get a better feel, and those data points we talk about, how they fare each and every night, and in what categories Danny and Justin are looking at. And probably it's taking care of the ball. Can you spread the floor and make a three? That's the intriguing part about Flip, and that may be a steal down the road and an early second-round pick. But who knows? But it's interesting to watch, and I think you're right. I think the last 6 to 9 games, we've seen some improvement, some growth, but there's still those minutes of 2 to 4 minutes spans where the Jazz seem to crumble a bit, and the pressure hits them, and they go, uh-oh. Here it is. Until you understand what it takes to win and push yourself through those minute or two of miscues, then the Jazz will continue to struggle. But you know what? I think the fans like to be entertained. The house has still been packed at Delta Center, Spence. I'm still just wowed by the support of the Jazz fans and the fan base. It's always been there. I don't see it letting up right now. They're intrigued to see how this team does too, in my opinion. I wasn't sure that would be the case this year, but that's what I've seen so far.
Last thing, Craig, then we'll set you loose. There is a list where the Jazz actually rank among the league's best, believe it or not. So Bobby Marks wrote his piece today, does it every year, NBA draft asset rankings, 7-year outlooks for all 30 teams. Oklahoma City is 1, which feels unfair. San Antonio is 2, which also feels a little unfair because they have the next rising star. Brooklyn is 3, but the Jazz are 4. Okay, so here's the deal. We'll just summarize it real quick, and then I'm going to give you the space because I do have a question. Incoming first-round picks, 13 of them, 6 of their next 7 owned. Of course, that OKC pick has to convey at some point, and then the draft capital from Gobert and Mitchell. There's a Laker pick. They got a top 5 protected from Minnesota. There are a couple of swap rights as well. So tradable first-round picks, 9. Second-round picks, 3. And so unbelievable to consider the capital they have in their back pocket. My question for you is, paint a picture of hope when this long game comes to an end and we look back on the last 3 years and the next whatever amount of years it's going to take to get this thing done. What should Jazz fans hope this project looks like when it's fully baked?
Well, they have to hope, and I think the end game here is obviously a long window of opportunity, a wide window of opportunity in an aging Western Conference. And there's some aging great players like Antetokounmpo in the East as well. LeBron just turned 40. KD continues to battle injuries. Booker's 10 years in. Steph Curry's 35. And the list goes on and on. I think the Jazz have set themselves up to be a younger, dynamic team, much like what OKC is right now with SGA. And, Spence, I think the simple game plan is to continue to build. There's going to be some tough times, and we're living it, right now. The Jazz are now 7-25, and we play the Miami Heat, who, by the way, is in a position of getting older with Jimmy Butler. Tyler Hero has been kind of on that trade block or mentioned for years since he arrived in Miami. But Jimmy supposedly wanted out, but now maybe not. I think the Jazz are going to let some things work themselves out, I think first and foremost. But yet the draft capital that Danny owns has to be used correctly. You have to get lucky, as they did with Stockton and Malone and a guy named Gobert and Donovan. And I think that has to play into this factor as well. You have to draft smart, but you also have to be lucky on occasion. And I think Danny understands that. You don't hit on every pick. And Will Hardy's told us all before, look, this is a tough game. And you know what? It's tough to make a roster. It's tough to stick. Some people don't have the stomach to actually do the work to make it into a long, illustrious, successful career. And I'm glad he said that, because that sends a message to this team as you have to work if you want to be a winner and if you want to be the best. There's still a long road ahead, but I think each and every game they play, they chip a little bit away. And that would be my message. It's not going to happen overnight. And patience, yeah, it's key. But at the same time, I understand fans want it sooner than later, right? And it makes my job easy, makes your job easy when you got a winning team every night. But it is intriguing to watch the growth. There's little increments if you really watch closely, Spence. And I'm hoping, everyone's hoping that, more draft picks come, more evaluation, but it's quicker. It's sooner than later on the way these guys develop and mesh as one team.
I got to say, Craig, your commitment to the bit of the 2025 New Year's glasses during the first segment, where you wore the glasses and then actually broke the game down while wearing the glasses, was phenomenal television. So kudos to you and Thurl and Lord. It was well done.
Well, I tell you, I couldn't see a thing, but I just kind of thought about a little bit of that backcourt that needs to continue to improve, and I just kind of went from there. But, yeah, hey, 2025 upon us. Hopefully good things happen. Going to be an interesting year. That's all I can say.
For sure. Be well, my friend. Safe travels, okay?
Thanks, man. Talk soon.
All right, the great Craig Bolerjack, TV voice of the Utah Jazz, brought to you by Big O Tires. They offer winter and all-season tires to help give you proper traction to take on the slippery roads ahead. We want to keep our customers safe on the road and help them save money on tires and service. There's always something on sale at Big O Tires with financing options to fit any budget and any situation. Schedule an appointment over the phone or online and visit BigOTires.com to find a location near you. All right, we continue the Big Show, Big Hour. We'll do mostly college football with Gordon Monson. Coming up next, some, how shall I say, incendiary accusations as far as how BYU is recruiting Utah football players. Can't corroborate any of it, but it's out there. We'll bring Gordon in for that. Stormy Buonantony is going to stop by for college football. Sugar Bowl right now, 3-3, Notre Dame, Georgia. So keep it right here. We'll keep you up to date on ESPN 700. Was Foreigner inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last night, or at least on television being inducted?
You better believe it.
Huh. Must have missed that part of the broadcast. That's how we're rolling on the show today. A good song to play for our next guest is the Big Show Big Hour, brought to you by Big O Tires, rolls on a Thursday afternoon. Gordon Monson, Happy New Year, sir. How are we doing?
I'm doing just fine. Happy New Year to you, Spence.
Did you tune in to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, being the rock guy that you are, last night on TV?
You know, I saw part of it, but I didn't watch it. I got to admit, I did not watch it. I'm not a big kind of award show kind of fella, but anyway, it's good for what it's for.
Even though you only work for awards, if I remember correctly, that's the main motivation, that you do what you do so you can win your awards. Is that right?
As I said, it's good for who it's for. You know, I don't know. It just doesn't it seem like Hollywood and the music industry and the show business in general awards itself more than just about any other industry that you know of?
It's a very self-grandizing type situation. There's no doubt. But I know you love music, so I figured I'd kick the tires. Do you at your very young, ripe age, do you still make New Year's resolutions, or have you just given up? You're holding on for dear life?
Well, I did make a couple things. I saw a video from someone, or someone told me about it, that you shouldn't make New Year's resolutions. You should just make a list of the things that you want to do, because then those are the things you will do if you really want to do them. And that makes a lot of sense. I did make one New Year's resolution, and I pronounced it to my wife and to my daughter, and they both laughed out loud, Spence.
I got to know what it is now.
I said that in 2025 I was going to try hard to be more positive.
Gordon, you've made that resolution I've known you like 15 years. That's your resolution every year.
Well, isn't that the way resolutions are?
Yeah, but at some point, don't you have to put the work in, or they just become empty promises?
Well, that's all I thought they were to begin with.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
yeah, I wouldn't mind being a little more positive at times.
What would you say a New Year's resolution would be for Coach Witt?
Well, I'm torn on that one, because on the one hand, I would think do what you want to do, keep doing it as long as you want to do it. On the other hand, I would say, oh man, pack it in, go have some fun, go have more fun than you're having now. And he's probably having a lot of fun now, but life's too short. I think there's a lot of things that he has to live for that are really good things that have nothing to do with dealing with NIL payments, or, you know, whether a 21-year-old kid is going to make the right call at the right time to do the right thing for the right reasons so that your team can win. I know coaches are paid a whole lot of money, Spence, and whether they deserve it, that kind of money or not, is up to people to decide for themselves. But I'm telling you, that's both a rocket to ride and a roller coaster to ride too, because it's up and down and all around.
Well, I appreciate the perspective, Zig Ziglar, but this is a sports talk radio show. So, like, what about Kyle, the football coach? What should Utah football hope for this year? I mean, thank you, Tony Robbins. We're all very inspired, but for the sake of the program, what should Utah football hope for this year?
How about putting an offense on the field
there we
you
go.
can rely on?
There we go.
I mean, that would really be it. The defense has had a little bit of up and down undulations through the years, but you figure that they'll get that part of it figured out. But the offense, man, I tell you, last year that was hard to watch, and I understand it. And Kyle has said this, that in this day and age, the quarterback, you've got to have a quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback, then you're toast. You might be able to bumble and stumble around a little bit and maybe go to a bowl game or something if you have sort of a mid-range quarterback. But in order for your team to be great, you have to have a guy who really knows what he's doing behind center. And I mean, it's funny to say that in a team sport like football, where blocking and tackling and playing defense, all of that is so important. But if you don't have a guy behind center who can really get the job done for you when you need him to do it, then you're in trouble. And look, we've seen that in the college football postseason thus far.
Yeah, we have, and I want to move over there in a moment. But on the BYU side of things, since the season is now behind us, and initially after the win over Colorado at the Alamo Bowl, just kind of off the top of my head, I said that feels like maybe a top 10 season in BYU football history. But if you dig a little bit deeper, there's a case to be made. I mean, look, it starts and ends with 84. I mean, the undefeated national championship, 96 team, Sark, Cotton Bowl, 14 wins. That Doman Staley team in 2001, really good. I don't include the COVID team. All right. I mean, pat on the head. Good job, all that stuff. And then way back in the day, late 70s, early 80s, a grip of good teams with McMahon and Young and Wilson and all that. And I'm not saying rank it where you think it should be, but is it fair to say that this was historically great as far as what Kalani and his staff just did?
Yeah, I think it is. The best BYU team I think I ever saw play was that '83 team, the team before the '84 championship, because that was Steve Young's senior year, and they lost their first game. I think it was the Baylor, and then after that they went undefeated. That team was, I think, even better than the '84 team, but that's just my opinion. And I agree with you on '96. That was another team that had they not lost to Washington on the road, a very good Washington team, who knows how good that could have been. They beat K-State in the Cotton Bowl. But I would rank this team right up there. There's no doubt about it. The one thing that I wonder about with this team is getting back to the quarterback. And I don't want to sit here and rip Jake Retzlaff. He just had a pretty darn good year, and his team has led his team to a whole lot of success, but I guess I'm not sure I trust him. So many important turnovers down the stretch to this season, and yeah, BYU just wiped Colorado right out. But I'm telling you, there were some pretty goofy plays that Retzlaff tried to pull off, and maybe that's part of his charm. BYU fans remember that Ty Detmer had like 28 interceptions the year he won the Heisman. And maybe some people think it's not that important if your offense is rolling otherwise. But there were times this year, especially toward the end of the season, and those two losses they had, where if Retzlaff hadn't thrown those important picks, they might have won both of those games, and they didn't. So I guess that would be one thing. And I'm not saying he's not a good quarterback. I'm not saying that he might have a terrific season next year. But he just has to continue to learn to play that position and to know when to pull the trigger. And like I said, to get the ball to the right place at the right time for the right reasons. And he hasn't completely mastered that yet.
So ultimately, this has led to a lot of frustration about the college football playoff system. And I'll just ask you pretty simply, I mean, from a BYU standpoint, strength of record, strength of schedule, that Kansas loss, as you referenced, will stick in their craw. But the other loss, to Arizona State, who showed that they belonged by essentially outplaying Texas, and then they beat a playoff team at SMU. And they weren't really, Gordon, even in the conversation down the stretch. I mean, that's one thing to keep in mind. The final couple of iterations of the CFP rankings and the debate around the 12 did not include BYU, but should it have? Do you think BYU has a case for being snubbed with this 12-team CFP?
I'm not sure that I thought that until I saw the way they played against Colorado. And then all of a sudden I started thinking it, and the college football playoff, let's say it the way it is. College football's jacked up. It's got bias toward the SEC and the Big Ten. We all know it. It's, and I suppose you've probably talked a lot about what happened. Was that targeting in that game, ASU against Texas or not? But there are reasons to believe that there are powers that be that want to see certain power leagues do well. And, BYU, if BYU had been Alabama and played the way the Cougars had played this year, I think they would have been in. But I don't think they got that much consideration. I certainly didn't hear much chatter about BYU getting in, and maybe they were looking at the two losses against Kansas and ASU, and they thought, okay, those games came later in the year. In the NCAA tournament, a lot of people talk about which direction is the team headed when it comes to the selection committee picking them or placing them with a certain seed. And I think BYU had shown some weaknesses that made it easier for the committee to ignore them.
And the timing of the losses, and again, that Kansas loss hurts. But, I mean, as far as just simply who the best team is, eye test, and again, several metrics, which should have, I think, put BYU at a different level or a different area as far as where they were talked about. I can understand the frustration. But it's weird, Gordon, for a sport as great as college football, like BCS 4 team, now 12 team, they can't seem to land on the best way to crown a champ. And I talked to Bowler about this last segment. Joel Klatt's solution, and you're good with this because you always talk about the Rose Bowl, including the horribly boring parade and the flowers and such. But Joel Klatt's whole thing is we have a bowl game that feels like it is the preeminent bowl, the preeminent atmosphere and stadium. He thinks you make the Rose Bowl the college football equivalent of the Super Bowl. And then you format the tournament the way that the NFL does, of course, with divisions and conferences, and let the teams play themselves in and remove the arbitrary exercise of having a bunch of dudes in a room decide who gets. What do you think about that?
Sounds good to me, except for ripping the power away from the folks who have it now, unless you somehow implement them into it so that they can have the power. And by power, really, I mean money, Spence. I mean, that's really what it is. That makes total sense, especially with the direction college football is going, and not just the direction it's going, but also the interest that is generated. That would make a whole lot of sense to me because college football, as you know, we've talked about it before, is so regionalized, and now that the conferences have grown, a little less regionalized, but there's no way that all those teams can play each other. And so how in the world are you going to be able to figure it all out? And that phrase you used, the eye test, it seems to me like that's more an excuse for the committee than anything else. I'm not sure what the hell eye test means. A team looks good? What makes you think it looks good? Is it because it's beating teams by 50 points, or is it because it knows how to win clutch games? I mean, you can paint that any which way you want it, but I would like to see it get more and more in a direction where it is equalized, at least to the extent of how what the competition looks like getting in, and so that the qualification measurement is a little more consistent.
Yeah, and look, they've tried a bunch of different formulas, but and to your point, we really could bottom line all this and talk about the golden rule, and that is the men with the gold makes the rules, and they just don't want to give up any of their money, any of their power. I think at some point they're going to be forced to do so, but the product itself continues to pull great interest and great ratings. Do you think if they continue to ignore the clear ills off the field at some point, people will be disenfranchised? I mean, there are several people that are already turned off to like this neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism that's now permeating into college football with the potential of private equity money and venture capitalists essentially buying programs. But is that enough for people to turn off the TV? Because until it is, Gordon, they're not going to give a rip. I mean, for years we heard concussions. People are going to stop watching pro football. The players are jerks off the field. Domestic violence, it's going to affect the product. Colin Kaepernick knelt. All this stuff. And people continue to watch. Do you think college football is in the same stratosphere as the NFL where it seems to be somewhat Teflon?
I don't think anything is completely Teflon, although you bring up a great point because you and I and others have had many discussions about concussions and what that's going to mean for the future and how many moms are going to let their kids get involved in the game. And the NFL is more popular now than it's ever been, and that was, what was that, 10 years ago we were talking about that? Like you said, as though it was going to doom the sport. And it hasn't. But I believe that anything can be screwed up if it's not properly organized. And the college game could get messed up if the people who are in charge don't find a way to make it as good as it can be. You know, the funny thing about what you just said about private equity and the professionalization of the college game, maybe those influence will make it so it has to become more equitable, because people aren't going to – these folks who want to become partners with schools around the country, generally you do that. One, they want to make money, which is already the number one goal for everybody involved. But two, they're going to want it as equitable as possible. And not just in the SEC and not just in the Big Ten. But we'll see how these hookups happen and who's going to be demanding what. But I think people who are investing large sums of money into the college game are going to really insist upon making it as equitable as it can be along the lines of the NFL playoff.
So the arms race that is taking place across the landscape of college football certainly is topical, but the local situation, since you and I last spoke, has really spiked. And Keanu Tanavas is really good, and he's a good kid. You know, you see every time I've interviewed him once, and I've heard him interviewed a bunch. He seems like a thoughtful, nice kid, and he's a really good player. Cam Calhoun goes to Tuscaloosa. That hurts, but Keanu's moving just 35, 40 miles down south, as is Carson Ryan, who I think has a chance to play well in that system, and Hunter Clegg, who went on his mission after committing to Utah and decided to go down to Provo as well. And look, I cannot speak to, nor will I even corroborate the accusations about, is this fair, is that unfair? There's no regulation. And smart people, when there's no regulation, find ways to up their bottom line. I understand why Ute fans are frustrated because Keanu's really, really good, but you know, if you're not on one side, you're going to be on the other. And Utah has had players. Francis Bernard came up here to play and played really well. So you wrote on this kind of the arms race between Kyle and Kalani and BYU and Utah. What do you make of the recent happenings?
I find it fascinating because those two are supposedly such good friends. But it's like, even if you're a friend, all is fair in this whole situation. Like you say, without it being regulated, then it's like all bets are off, man. You can just do whatever you want. Now, you and I said I was going to be more positive, but I'm somewhat of when I look at things, I go, come on, what's really happening here? But the interviews that he has done, boy, he sounds sincere, doesn't he? And his desire to be somewhere where he feels like he can grow more as a man and all. I mean, he really sounds sincere, but I just have to believe. I mean, who is selling what to him to make him make a move like that? Because it sure sounds like he liked it at Utah. I can't say why he's really doing that, but I will say this. 5 years ago, I would have had a hard time believing that this trend would be happening in the direction it's now happening toward the Cougars. Something has changed, and we saw that in the season, and now we're seeing it in some of these things that have gone the other way in past seasons. It seems like now, at least for some people, BYU, for whatever reason, and fill in the blank, for whether you want more NIL, you want a certain atmosphere, you want a certain camaraderie, you want a certain connection with the coach or coaches, whatever reason, it seems like BYU is offering something that folks want.
Well, I think there are a few reasons, Gordon, and one of them is very obvious, and certainly we know now with the public knowledge that A.J. DeBance is making more than $5 million to play 5 months of college basketball. It means that their collective is in order. And so, you know, I've heard they have 9 7-figure donors while Utah has 2. As you and I have discussed, I think that's going to change, and I hope to have something to talk about on the show in a month or so to give Ute fans a little wind at their sails right now because, to your point, I think they're feeling a little bit sorry for themselves. And when you're on the wrong side of these things, you're going to cry foul. BYU is cheating, whatever it is. But it's certainly money. Their collective certainly is in order. But it's also, and this is tough, man, because Coach Witt, Morgan Scalley, I mean, these are members of the LDS Church. And when somebody comes to you and says, God has told me to do this, there's nothing you can really say because people need their beliefs. People care about their beliefs, right? And you can dismiss it. You can mock it. You know, people of faith sometimes are easy targets. But, you know, if a young man comes to you and says, God has told me that this is where I need to be, what are you supposed to say to him as far as that desire. I think it's a complicated thing.
Well, I would say that God is not a season ticket holder down at BYU. I mean, and look, I had a hard time with this, and you and I have talked about this in the past, and had some pretty comical moments through the years about when people mix religion with sports. And I'm not sure that's what's going on here. It's more a separate thing, but it's at a separate place where somebody wants to experience something, or at least that's what they say. But man, I couldn't take the Boise State coaching staff where everything is praise to Jesus. And look, I'm a Christian, and that's all important to me and whatnot. But just leave it alone when it comes to freaking football. You know, it seems like that's it. But did you hear what they were? Every one of them. You ask them a technical question about what was going on in the half, and somehow Jesus got involved in every play call. And I get tired of that after a while. I don't think God really gets involved in that kind of thing. He, or he or she, whatever. It's just that some people want to believe that, and if that's the way they roll, then that's the way they roll. Just like you said. And can you call that into question? It's hard because it is their beliefs, and they make it sound like it's awfully important to them. And so if it is, it is. But sometimes I think that is used in a manner that is less than sincere. And I'm not speaking specifically to anything in this particular case, but I do think that, hey, man, you can believe in God and get good religion at Utah as well as at BYU. And I will say this, that Utah, you wait and see. Utah's too good of a school. They have too many good things going for them to allow whatever the rules are now for them to allow themselves to get steamrolled. I think they will figure it out. They will find a way. It may be a little clumsy at first, or there might be a little hang time here, but you wait and see. I believe the Utah football will be Utah football the way people have come to believe it is and see it as. But I am impressed also with the progress BYU has made.
Yeah, well said. All right, one more thing here, because I'm just genuinely curious about your take on this dynamic. For a number of years, quite frankly, decades, there was kind of this like unwritten rule in media and hopefully fan bases as well. But fans are lunatics. We know that. We love them. Luckily, that's why we have jobs, because people are interested in the teams they love, but they're lunatics. And so for years, the walking line was like, don't crack on a college kid. Like, as I keep saying, you can always not tweet. You know, you always have the option to not hit send on that tweet you want to send to the player that is leaving your school. However, Gordon, for years, the reason that was kind of the rule is these are young people that are unpaid. Is the fact that they're now making a really good living, some of them seven figures, some of them high seven figures, does that open them up to more criticism as far as the way they conduct their business, in your opinion?
Boy, I like the way you phrase that question, Spence, because ordinarily I would say just let kids make their own minds up about what they want to do. It's their lives. Sometimes they make decisions about where to go when they're 18 years old or 17. And who knows anything at 17 or 18? I mean, you really don't know. You don't even know who you are at that point. And so the years that follow are really important in making important decisions about your future. And so I normally would lean that way, but now that it is becoming more of a professional environment, I can understand why people might get more involved that way. But sending nasty texts or messages to kids because they decide that their situation is better or their future will be better at a certain place, man, that's a personal decision that I'm not going to get involved with unless there's something really nefarious going on. Otherwise, I would say, hey, leave the kids alone.
Well said. All right, my friend. Great to visit with you. Happy New Year. Remember, Larry David says we have until January 3rd, so tomorrow's the last day to get the Happy New Year's out, buddy. So thanks for the time. Have a good one. We'll chat soon.
Okay, thanks, Ben. See you.
All right, Gordon Monson. All right, 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. More college football coming up next. Stormy Bonatoni's going to stop by. We do a little sports court on a Thursday before we move into the 5 o'clock hour of the program. Sugar Bowl going on right now. Notre Dame is taking a 13-3 lead in a halftime over Georgia. We'll keep you up to date on a Thursday, so keep it here on ESPN 700. Cher batted leadoff last night. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. They had her set the scene right away. So that's what we're doing today. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, and Cher was number one last night.
We're turning back time.
That's not possible, but it's a great song. It is a great song. We're going to get to the 5 o'clock hour of the program. Notre Dame scores again, 19-3, Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans. Our next guest, let's talk more college football. She's very important, so appreciate her time. Stormy Bonatoni on a Thursday afternoon. Stormy, happy Thursday. How are you?
I'm great, thank you, especially since you said I'm very important. I don't get that often, so thank you.
Haven't you won like 4 Emmys or something? You're very important, aren't you?
I do have 4 Emmys, but I can't take credit for them all. It's a team effort.
Okay.
Twice as many as Dave Foster.
Yeah, that's 4 more than me. So you are important, Stormy, but I appreciate the time. Let's start with what's happening in front of us. How surprised are you to watch Notre Dame just so far dog walk Georgia in the Sugar Bowl?
Just for a frame of reference here, just FYI, I have been on a flight coming back from Pasadena for the last hour, and I haven't been able to see exactly how this has transpired, but I liked Notre Dame in the game, and so I feel pretty good about my pick, at least coming in where things sit right now. But as I pull up my ESPN stats on my phone, it doesn't seem like anybody wants to convert a third down, which is interesting. But I liked the Irish today. I'm happy for them getting off to this start, but anything can happen in these college football playoff games, as we saw with ASU coming back yesterday.
Certainly. So let's just get your opinion on the hot topic of the day. It feels like that's targeting all day, every day, does it not?
It is. It is. And I understand that nobody wants a game to come down to a final call. The fact that you go to review, though, there's no world in which that wasn't targeting. And if it was the second or third quarter, literally any other spot in the game, it's targeting. I'm typically a let them play type, especially in those key moments, a holding, maybe a questionable PI, whatever. When you go to review like that, I feel like you have to call it by the letter of the law. So I feel for Arizona State in that spot. Granted, they had other opportunities to win the game, and they didn't. And it's not to say that should that targeting call go their way, that they're going to make the field goal. That is a team that's had kicking issues all season. As it was, they had to punt it away, and they didn't win the game when all is said and done.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, get off the field on 4th and 13, but certainly hard done. So if I follow up, is your understanding, or I don't know, because I haven't heard anything that's convinced me that was the right course of action by the folks that were reviewing the call. Did that simply come down to time and situation, knowing that essentially that puts Arizona State in a position to win the game, and they didn't want to do that based off a call? Is that the reasoning?
I mean, no one's going to say that outwardly, right? No one would ever say that out loud, but it feels like it's kind of the quiet thing out loud now with us talking about it, because that's what it feels like in my mind, unfortunately, that I think from a big picture standpoint, you don't want to have a game come down to a call and have that be the full narrative at the end of the day.
All right, fair enough. So all year long, it seems like there have been a lot of really smart football people that believe, as far as when teams are reaching their ceiling, like how good is your best? What does that look like? That Ohio State's best was better than everybody else's best. But the home loss to Michigan was wild. I've been to Autzen a couple of times. I'm not blaming anybody for losing up there, especially the way they did it. Where we sit here today, do you think Ohio State is the most talented team in the game? Do you think their ceiling is higher than everybody else's ceiling right now?
I do. And I think that they are the rightful favorite to win the national championship where things sit right now. And I had the pleasure of being on the Rose Bowl broadcast yesterday on Ohio State's sideline and seeing their leadership and seeing how they operate, seeing their physicality and size and athleticism all in person. And it is hard for me to imagine right now that if Ohio State continues to play offensively and defensively the way that they did against Oregon in the semifinals and in the national championship, that anybody else can beat them. Especially when you think about the first meeting with Oregon earlier this season, it's like everything that they had an issue with in that game was fixed and exponentially improved when we saw in the Rose Bowl yesterday. They couldn't bring pressure on Dylan Gabriel week 7 in that matchup with Oregon. They sacked him 8 times yesterday, 13 tackles for loss, most sacks in Rose Bowl in 20 years. Offensively, Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith were dialed in. Can you believe that kid is a true freshman?
That's
There's
wild.
nothing about watching Jeremiah Smith that makes me think that he's 18 years old. It's phenomenal.
So, from an Oregon standpoint, our former Pac 12 buddy, we're out here in the former Pac 12 footprint, and we're all still suffering from the collapse of the conference. But if you're an Oregon Duck fan, Stormy, don't you feel a little bit hard done that your reward for being the best team in college football and staying clean and winning the Big Ten was a matchup with that team, with Ohio State? I understand how it all went down, but if I'm an Oregon fan, I am feeling a little bit hard done. I'll admit that.
You should. And Dan Lanning, credit him for being the leader and coach he is, that even when pressed about it on the podium after the game, he would not complain publicly about the format. But they got done dirty the way that this thing plays out, and seeding needs to be changed. I think that the playoff committee is extremely aware of that, and there will be changes moving forward. Oregon wins all their games. They're the Big 12 champs. They should not have been rewarded with an opponent like Ohio State. That path just simply does not make sense. I also, while we're going down this road, think more games should be on home field. And what we saw in the first round, I think that would be incredible to see in the quarterfinals as well. I think the expanded playoff is a good thing. I actually tweeted about this earlier today. Ohio State, who we were just highlighting, looks like the best team in the country right now and could be very well poised to win a national championship. They wouldn't have been in the field of 4 playoffs. So I think that expansion is a good thing if at the end of the day our goal is to have a rightful national champion and the best team in the country. But the way that things are laid out right now, it doesn't make sense. The teams that got byes didn't make sense. I love Arizona State. I love Boise State. I am such a supporter of the little guy, and I love that ASU showed that they belonged on that stage, but they didn't deserve a first-round bye.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, and we're in the Big 12 footprint, the former Pac-12 footprint, and our broadcast partner, the University of Utah, along with Boise and TCU, one of the original BCS busters way back in the day, so certainly applaud the plot of teams that might be underlooked nationally. But what did, if anything, Stormy, ASU's performance say to you about how the Big 12 can potentially match up with the Power 2, as I call them?
I do think that they are a little we're still trying to figure out what the Big 12 is. And I think it was so great for Arizona State to be able to have that moment on that stage yesterday to show, hey, we belong, especially when you consider the beginning of the season, they were picked dead last in the conference. Nobody expected anything from Arizona State throughout this season. You can say the same for BYU with how low they were picked in the conference, and then they end up having the remarkable season that they have, and showing up against Colorado in the bowl game was fantastic to watch if you were somebody who was following BYU's season this year. I don't think they got enough credit throughout the course of the year and where they were ranked along the way. And I hated for them that those last couple games went the way that they did, that they didn't get to compete for a Big 12 title game. But overall, I feel like this conference has a ton of potential. And if they can just continue to have physicality and win games when they need to, it'll make a big difference. But that means a team like Kansas State that has all of these expectations needs to deliver in those big games. That means Utah, who we all have year in and year out, these high expectations for, needs to do the same. And so I think that's important, especially for a program like Utah, who has been known for physicality and great defense and all of this stuff. I feel for them that the quarterback position has held them back so much in recent years.
Yeah, well said. Let's move over into some local storylines now, because I know you were on the broadcast team for at least one, if not more, BYU games this year. Am I remembering that?
So many. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. So you had an up-close seat. And look, I completely understand. And the way I kind of do this show is I'm more of a diagnoser, not a prognosticator, because I feel like, and I know you do it and you do it well, but I feel like trying to predict these things is an exercise in futility. So we are sitting here today with the ability to diagnose and be retrospective now that the games have been played. And I understand that when the CFP bracket was being debated, that BYU wasn't really a part of that debate at the end because they lose 2 of 3, a really tough home loss against Kansas, but they beat a playoff team in SMU, and then they lose to a playoff team in ASU. Their strength of record, their strength of schedule, better than SMU's. Do they have a case as far as feeling like they should have had something to say about this national championship?
It's a tough thing, I feel like, because the committee is so rooted in the eye test. which is unfortunate. And I'm sure you guys all heard very well the comments from Kirk Herbstreit a week ago on the national broadcast about like his feelings about ultimately getting the best team. And not to say that the College Football Playoff Committee is fully going to go down that road, which they would not, but it's finding that right blend. And I think, unfortunately for BYU, there were a lot of preconceived notions about this team that even as they were winning, there were questions about, well, how are they winning? And is the success that they're having turning over the football and on special teams, is that something that's replicable game after game after game? And even though they proved that it was real and that they continued to do it and they were winning a lot of those close games for the majority of the season, I just don't think that that was enough in the committee's eyes. I was such a fan of BYU, and I love the job that Kalani Sitake has done. I think this senior class that they put together for this team, I know they wanted to go out on a high note, and I'm glad they had their moment against Colorado to show what they were made of in the Alamo Bowl. But as far as that top 12, I don't know. I feel like you could go either way.
So let me follow up with this because you're uniquely qualified to talk about it. As somebody who saw BYU up close multiple times, and you've also seen some of the other best teams in the country multiple times, including recently Ohio State, how do you think BYU stacks up with some of the best teams in the country, with this other, the other 11 teams or whatever? Do you think they belong in that cul-de-sac?
I thought you just said we're not prognosticating.
Fair enough.
It's hard to say in those hypotheticals. I would have loved to have seen BYU get an opportunity like Arizona State did to see how they stack up. Because on their schedule this year, for example, so SMU, yes, they beat them week 2, but SMU obviously did not show up on this stage. Arizona State did, and they went toe-to-toe with ASU in that game in the end of November. So how does that look against another opponent that is in the Big Ten or the SEC? I don't know because I haven't seen it, but I would have loved for them to have had that chance.
So you referenced the University of Utah, and we're a mile and a half away from Rice-Eccles Stadium. They're a broadcast partner, and it's interesting this year to see our two local teams where BYU was not thought to be a player kind of instilled themselves as the favorite in the Big 12 after a 9-0 start, whereas Utah was the preseason favorite in both Vegas and the media poll. Just kind of wonder how stunned you were to see this program that is 2 years removed from their second straight Rose Bowl kind of stumble to this 5-7 season in year one in the Big 12.
I was shocked. If you would have heard any of the shows that I was doing last summer, previewing the Big 12 and previewing the college football playoff contenders, every conversation I had involved Utah. I was such a believer. I love what Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley do to have a physical brand of defense, and they can just continue to get talent on that side of the ball. Cam Rising coming back, this is going to be the year that it all comes together and he's healthy, and you go on that 4-0 start and then everything falls apart. And that was even with Rising getting injured so early in the season and having Isaac Wilson step in for a couple of those wins. It was not what it was billed to be. And then goes from just rising to more and more injuries piling up. And I was happy for them that in the BYU game, despite being on a 4-game losing streak going into that game, they had as much fight and grit as they did. And that was such a Kyle Whittingham brand of football. And I still can't believe that they ended up losing that game. But yeah, like this season, I really thought was theirs for the taking. I loved them to make the college football playoff this year, and then things just got derailed so quickly and could never get back together.
So Utah is in a position, Stormy, where it's going to be next fall, it's going to be an entirely new team, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, new wide receivers. And ultimately, in the landscape of what we're dealing with this sport, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, BYU relied on continuity, growth in-house. They made some transfer portal additions last year, not a ton, and they returned a grip of players. So I think it's safe to say that BYU, barring a bunch of injuries, should be good again next year. But as far as a one-year rebuild, which is what Utah essentially is doing, how challenging is it to turn that into something competitive as soon as year two in the Big 12?
So I would say in years past, it's a very hard thing to do, but we've seen, as you put it really well, in this new era of college football, that it can be easier depending on what you're able to put together in the transfer portal. And I mean, look at what Indiana did this year with a new coach, and say what you want about their schedule. And if we're going back to the BYU conversation, I felt like they should have been above Indiana in like the bulk of that conversation. But with things with Utah specifically, like you look at all these other programs that are able to turn things around, and I feel like that's very doable. And Utah is a very desirable place to be. The coaching staff is so consistent. You know what you're getting when you're a part of this program. They have a great culture and brand and buy-in and all of that. So I feel like if there's a program that can do it, it is Utah.
All right, Stormy, before I set you loose, while we're in this space, it's hotly debated on this show and elsewhere, and certainly recency bias on this show means we're covering a Utah football team that really for the first time is in an absolute deconstruct and rebuild. So it's been more top of mind, but I know they've tried to step in with certain regulations, limiting the portal to certain dates, reopening it in the spring. NCAA not allowed to legislate anything or hand down any sort of punishment. They've lost that power, which has bred a lot of chaos, a lot of skepticism for certain people that love college athletics, and the neoliberal capitalism that's now spilled over into college is a turnoff for some people. Are you bullish still on the future of college football? The ratings are still there. The numbers are still there. Do you think they have real questions to answer off the field to keep this product moving in the right direction?
I mean, of course, there are real questions that have to be answered, and this is going to take some time to figure out, but step by step, I think it will get done. To your point, the ratings for college football are as high as they've ever been. And so for people that want to say college football is dying and nobody likes this product anymore and bowl games suck and people are opting out and da-da-da-da-da, sure, say that as much as you want, but people are still watching. And with this expanded playoff specifically, I think it made this regular season that much more interesting for the arguments of who's going to be in and who's not and why. But with that said, like the calendar is a problem. And I don't necessarily know what the solution is going to be. There does need to be regulation. I know Joel Klatt, who I'm sure you guys know well, as called a number of those Pac-12 games over the years. He has been adamant about the Rose Bowl should be the national championship every year, and it should still be on January 1st. So if you're able to make that happen and move the calendar back, and what does that mean for conference championship games? I think that so many people would love for that to be the case, and you work in more home field, not only first round but quarterfinal games, like I was mentioning earlier. But from a dollars and cents standpoint, would anyone ever do that? Because there's so much money involved in all of these bowl games, and there's a zillion questions to be asked. Fortunately, people that are much better suited to answer those questions are in those positions of power, and not me. I'm an idea man, but I hope that they do get some of these things figured out, because it's a sport we all love so much, the tradition, the pageantry, these student athletes who I'm so happy for them that they are able to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness and make money before they go to the NFL, because so many of them might not ever get that opportunity. So I think that there's a lot of good in the new age of college football. We just have to continue to grow that and try to make better decisions for these student athletes along the way.
Grape or strawberry Uncrustable?
Ooh, strawberry. Let's go.
But wow. Hot take.
I don't want to discriminate. I love both strawberry and grape. You're not going to find a bad word out of me on Uncrustables.
Fair enough. You are a busy person. Where can people find your work?
Thank you. Yes, I host a show called Money Moves Sports Betting Show on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, Monday through Friday, 9 to 11 Pacific every weekday, as well as a VSiN Pro Football Tailgate Show previewing all of the NFL games on Sunday mornings. And if you want to have a little fun getting into some FCS football this coming week, I will be on the call on ABC for the FCS title game on Monday.
Keep up the great work, Stormy. I appreciate your time, and Happy New Year, okay?
Thank you so much. Be well.
All right, Stormy Buonantony. She is a busy, hardworking person in this industry. On Twitter's at Stormy Buonantony is where you find her. She's really good. She's done a bunch of Big 12 games. Utah, BYU, was on the Rose Bowl call as well. So she's busy. Appreciate her time on this busy Thursday afternoon. All right, on a Thursday, we welcome in, during the new year, New year, but same great deal. See what I did there? More affordable options on wireless, on internet, and on cable TV. Ryan from the Dish Pros. Happy New Year, brother. How you doing?
Happy New Year, brother. Thank you so much. And, this is New Year, but same promotions. But, guys, we've only got a couple days with this Netflix offer. Listen, I'm hearing from all these customers the cable increases are massive. I've seen multiple customers call in, and they like, my bill went up 3 months ago, and then went up again this month. And my internet went up. Guys, if you're a YouTube TV subscriber, do you see that massive rate increase? How about your fiber internet with that 20% increase? Guys, this is the kind of the thing that this price guarantee that Dish offers. This is why it's worth it. Now, right now, it's the same price to get YouTube TV as it is to get Dish. But I'll tell you, in 2 years or a year from now, it's going to be more expensive for YouTube TV. So if you sign up for Dish, you'll get a faster DVR, a bigger DVR, auto hops commercials. You'll have access to all your streaming apps built into the same system, works on all your TVs, and we'll throw in Netflix for the next 2 years. And this promotion is stacked. Call us up today and upgrade. This offer is only going to last for a little bit longer. Also, with your fiber internet, guys, call us. You may just be able to use the same fiber, pay a different provider, and lower the bill 20%. This is the things that we do on a daily basis. You just got to call us up and let us upgrade you, get you a better system, better price, and put money into your pocket. Guys, $370 for this Netflix offer. If you're not interested in that, I'll throw you a $200 gift card. Call today. Don't wait. And upgrade. 424-DISH. And we'll throw in dinner at JCW's if you call right now. So get set up. 801-424-DISH.
All right. Give them a call. Ryan from the Dish Pros. Georgia gets a touchdown. So it's Notre Dame 20, Georgia 10. 9:36 left in the third. A lot of football left to be played in the Sugar Bowl. We'll keep you up to date. Do a little sports court coming up next. Then we'll launch into the 5 o'clock hour of the drive on a Thursday. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. It is Sports Court time. New year, same guys over at Handy and Handy, and both of them today, after we gave Preston the week off last week, we welcome in Garrett and Preston Handy, the first Sports Court of 2025, guys. My resolution this year is to make it even better. Ready to roll?
Happy New Year, Spence. Thanks.
Let's do it.
Great chatting with you as always. So interesting to see the rundown. I was debating this with some friends as we were watching college football. I honestly didn't know that the Park City Ski Patrol was on strike and they're negotiating with Vail. So I just learned about this recently. This is where we're going to start today with a local angle. What should our listeners know?
Yeah, Spence, we're talking about it on Sports Court because it involves skiing, and it's a local story. Ski patrollers are those, for those of you who ski, are those cool guys and gals up there in their red and black outfits with the big white cross on the back of their outfits. They're the ones who keep operations safe, help with safety issues, and also when people are injured, they're the ones that get them off the mountain and take care of them. Well, guess what? They're a union. And since about April, they've been negotiating with Vail. Vail is the parent corporation that owns Park City Mountain Resort, among other resorts around the country. And they've been negotiating, but they haven't gotten anywhere. And the main issues that they've been negotiating over are education and training packages for the patrollers. And also the big ones are the wages and benefits, including health insurance benefits. Well, they didn't get anywhere. So what they did is the Ski Patrol Union, they filed a complaint with an unfair labor practice complaint with the National Labor Relations Board. And Vail responds, goes, whoa, wait a minute here. What's going on? I thought we were going down a good road. Well, they didn't think they were, so they said, well, we wanted to mediate this, and the patrollers union said, okay, let's try and mediate this. Well, this is what we first got word of, and the issues, mediation is when they choose a party to act as a go-between, and they discuss these issues, and it's a negotiation that goes back and forth. Well, apparently they were in an all-day mediation and didn't go anywhere, and what did they do? What unions do? They went on strike right in the holidays, and they came out and said that Vail Resorts forced this work stoppage by bargaining in bad faith and repeatedly violating the National Labor Relations Act. They, consistent with Vail Resorts' bad faith tactics, the company has refused to give counteroffer wages and benefits in the last 2 weeks. And what was Vail's response? They said, hey, we're deeply disappointed by this, putting people at risk and drastic actions that attempt to disrupt mountain operations in the middle of the holiday season. Well, that's what unions do to try and get their point across. And so right now, the patrollers at Park City Mountain Resorts are on strike, and I think they've had to bring in some other people. But according to a lot, they're very low staffed on this important issue.
All right, Gary, you're up here.
Well, and I think it just brings up a potential interesting hypothetical situation, right? If Park City is going to continue to operate their mountain with just a fraction of the patrollers that they normally have because they're on strike, right? And, for example, somebody gets hurt or has an accident on the mountain and there's not enough personnel to respond, what sort of legal liability or issues are there? I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about that in another context, but I think there's some potential, legal implications that could come up.
All right, moving over, and I saw this, and I thought it was interesting because I do think the outcome here is worth watching if you're a fan of collegiate athletics. So 6 former Florida State basketball players are suing Leonard Hamilton, who's the head coach, for failing to follow through on promised NIL payments. And we've talked about this. Get it in writing. Young people, if you're listening to the show, just get it in writing. But there are going to be a lot of promises made by coaches and administrators that ultimately aren't written down. And if they're not followed, up on, I would imagine this could be the start of something pretty significant. So unpack the details with the latest on this.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Spence. I mean, get it in writing. But this is 6 former Florida State basketball players that have sued Leonard Hamilton, the head coach there, long-tenured head coach at Florida State, over this promise that they were going to get $250,000 each to play. This was, I think, last season. And so, although there's not a signed agreement over this, there are text messages and all kinds of conversations back and forth that lots of people have heard. That he was telling these players that, he had waiting for his business contacts and associates that were going to come through with this money for the players, and kept putting them off. They say they never got paid. At this point, I think a few of them, they don't have any more eligibility remaining, and the others have transferred out of the program. But what I think is really interesting about this case is Leonard Hamilton is sued personally here. I mean, he's obviously acting in his capacity, I think anyway, at the time that he makes these promises to these students. He's acting in his capacity as the coach, right, in his course and scope of employment. But Florida State is apparently not named as a defendant in this lawsuit. This is directly against the head coach, and that's got some real implications for him. And they're not really talking about this as necessarily NIL money, but really just a kind of pay-to-play type of arrangement that, he was just saying, I'm going to pay you guys. And yeah, like you mentioned, Spence, this is the ongoing trend, and we're seeing it a lot. I mean, but this Coach Hamilton, I guess, was not able to kind of nail down the boosters or whatever and get these guys paid.
All right, Preston, your turn to take a crack at this one.
Yeah, no, Garrett nailed it. The thing that jumped out at me right in the beginning was, wow, the Florida State Athletic Department's not named, the collective is not named, Florida State University is not named. Usually you pull in all the players that could potentially have an influence on this or a play in it, but only he is named individually. Maybe that's a strategic play, and maybe it ends up being a good one. The other thing jumps out at me is, these 5 players, none of them are there. One's in the NBA. 3 of them, I think, have transferred. They don't want to stick around and say, hey, coach, can I go in? We're serving you with a summons. And the other thing, if you pull up any article on this and you look at the photos of Coach Hamilton, he looks pretty stressed. He doesn't look very happy at all. They've shown some pretty good photos of him.
Yeah, he typically is kind of an ornery guy. Most college basketball coaches are. We know that around here. But, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't realize it was only against Leonard Hamilton. So certainly one of those things that could set the course for how these things play out moving forward. But here's an interesting one. I don't remember when it was, but I know it was years ago when the Dartmouth basketball team was moving towards the unionization push stuff. But apparently they're going to drop this unionization push. And I'm just learning about this, but I remember because we've covered this over the past few years. So what's the latest with the Dartmouth men's basketball team to try to push towards that unionization?
Yeah, Spence, it's a complete reversal, and we'll see how political stuff plays on this. But remember, the Dartmouth basketball team comes out of nowhere, and they said, hey, we want to become a union. We think that we have the elements, we have the qualifications, all the things that show that we are employees, and as employees of an employer, we can become a union. Well, this was fought by Dartmouth University, by the Ivy League schools. They saw this coming because, the Ivy League schools, none of these players are on scholarship, so they saw themselves as different. And it was fought, well, they were finally recognized as a union. And when unions are recognized, usually the other party comes to the bargaining table. Well, Dartmouth said, we're not doing any of this. We don't recognize the union. We're not going to bargain. So this dragged on and on. We've talked about it probably 3 times on here. Well, out of nowhere, what happens is, so they say, okay, well, you won't bargain. We're going to file a petition with the National Labor Relations Board. And that's sitting there and is going to go, and guess what? They finally say, you know what? We're withdrawing this. And the reasoning is they think that it's because now we've got a new administration. Trump's on board, and, the 2 people, the general counsel that was in place and the chair of the National Labor Relations Board, it doesn't look like they're going to retain their positions. And both of them held strong on this whole, well, if it looks like a duck and talks like a duck, it is a duck, meaning that these players, they're under the control of the university. They're given compensation for the university, so they're employees, and they should be able to unionize. Well, these 2 look like they're going to be out, and I think Dartmouth, the players, apparently they were involved in the decision. They see this as too big of a risk for the issue as a whole of athletes being employees, and they thought that it could set a bad precedent, even though they would have rights of appeal from the national board if it got denied, and, it set a bad precedent. They still had rights to appeal, but they reversed, and they've decided they're going to put this to bed for a while.
All right, Garrett, you're up, buddy.
Well, with the Dartmouth Union, I mean, I'll just use the topic to kind of segue to the next one we were going to talk about with you, Spence, which is we were going to kind of point out some legal issues to watch for in this coming year of 2025. And really the first one at the top of the list is this very issue, is the fight over our college athletes, employees of their universities, right? And so, again, as Preston just mentioned with the Dartmouth team, I mean, this is a constant. It's kind of a moving target right now, and it's a little hard to pin down, but it's and I'd kind of forgotten about it too, but USC has their football and basketball team, a pending argument before the National Labor Relations Board to be recognized as employees. So this is going to be an ongoing story of 2025. I was just going to hit on a few of these other stories for 2025, Spence. We did this a little bit last week in kind of our year in review, but the other one that we think is going to be a big story, continue to be anyway, of course, is the House settlement, right? Recognizing this right to, NIL and the big settlement with the NCAA. We've been talking about the House settlement as it being a foregone conclusion, but the reality is it still has to be formally approved by Judge Wilkin, who's overseeing the case and has overseen these other cases that we've talked about in this area. But so I think that's an ongoing legal issue. And then finally the other issue, and again, these all kind of are around this area of athletes as employees, but is the Danica Hamby case. She's the WNBA player who was traded by the Las Vegas Aces, and she claims it was because she was pregnant. And so she brought suit against the Las Vegas Aces and the WNBA. And part of her argument is that, hey, you're my co-employers, right? And so, again, we think her case has some big implications, and it'll be interesting to see in this next year how that plays out as well. But I think this is kind of the theme, right, is athletes' status as employees and how they're going to be compensated.
Let's stay in this space because I have the list in front of me when it comes to our guy Michael McCann and what to follow in 2025. So, Preston, I'll throw this at you because you referenced the election of Donald Trump and maybe the potential of what could come, motivating the Dartmouth basketball team to kind of wave the white flag for now. So what McCann points out, Trump's new National Labor Relations Board General Counsel is going to be Jennifer Abruzzo, who is a strong advocate of college athletes becoming employees and then having the right to unionize. So help me understand how Jennifer Abruzzo, being the general counsel, could potentially, is it a seamless thing that when she takes that position, she can just make it happen? Like, what does that process look and sound like?
Well, that's, I guess it looks like Jennifer Abruzzo is the current one who is big in favor of the employee or athletes being employed.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
She's not going to maintain her position,
Gotcha.
nor is the chair.
Okay.
They're thinking that it's going to be someone who is not as favorable to this issue of athletes being employees. And I think the House settlement, where players are sharing in revenue from the schools, that's going to bring this whole thing in there, that they're being paid by the schools. So are the employees, do they have employee status? I think there's got to be all kinds of legislation around that. It's a big tangled mess that, thank you, Sports Court. We're going to be talking about it for years because I think it's going to keep to evolve and, during this time.
Garrett, let me bring you in on one that we haven't touched on because I'm still dreaming of the day when I wake up and go check the mail and the NFL has written me a check for $370 or whatever it is. As a longtime subscriber to the Sunday Ticket, this has been an interesting thing to go back and forth with, but it's still out there, right? It's not finalized, the NFL Sunday Ticket appeal, yeah?
Yeah, well, the jury did hold that, and determined that the NFL violated antitrust laws, but the judge has taken a second look at it and granted what's called judgment as a matter of law, and so found that the jury was unreasonable. So, I mean, just by a whisker, the NFL escapes this, which could have been a huge multi-billion-dollar, a verdict that they would be facing. I mean, you're talking about millions of subscribers, Spence Checketts being one of them, with your Sunday Ticket prices. So, I mean, it's kind of back and forth and been ping-ponged around a little bit, but this case could end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. We could see that happen this year.
All right, last one for today, and whichever one of you wants to lead off, go ahead and take the space for President Carter passed away. Jimmy Carter, who, look, I will admit to not really fully knowing the impact that President Carter had on sports as far as the law and how the law affects sports. So I'm learning as we go here. What do you want our listeners to know?
Yeah, I was alive during President Carter's presidency, which was, I think, 77 through the end of 80, 4 years there. And I didn't know some things as well. And the big one was he was very influential in the American Sports Act of 1978. And what this did is this recognized, we thought that maybe it always is, but a U.S. Olympic Committee as a federally chartered corporation. So it became more organized. And the hope was that it would really propel U.S. interest in amateur sports, especially when, at the time there was this geopolitical stuff going on. And, how you performed in the Olympics was kind of a big statement and kind of a smack in the face to some of those other countries. And, we're the more powerful one and stuff like that. And so this act also went to kind of trying to clarify some sports that didn't have a lot of oversight. We're talking about like hockey and track and field, and it tried to kind of bring them all together under the NCAA and even high school athletic associations. And the hope was to have grassroots type of oversight, and maybe start, and help with the grassroots development of athletes and that type of thing. The one thing that I thought was really interesting is that it pointed out, and I do absolutely remember this, is in 1980, this was the Summer Olympics of 1980, and now just before that, back when I was a kid, the Olympics happened the same year. You had the Winter Olympics in the same year and the Summer Olympics that summer. Well, the Miracle of Ice, big thing in 1980, Lake Placid had happened in February that year, and here we come up on the Summer Olympics, and the Soviet Union, they go into Afghanistan, and they invade Afghanistan, and a bunch of countries around the world weren't happy about it, and President Carter led a charge with Congress, and our Congress got together and they boycotted that Olympics along with other 64 other countries. And so that was a big deal. People just anticipate the Olympics, and so the U.S. didn't show up, but the Soviet Union did show up, and we really don't know what happened to those Olympics. No one talks about those Summer Olympics, and certain athletes even sued. They wanted injunctions that they could play in it. I mean, these are athletes that have trained for their whole lives, and this is their prime. And, I'm looking forward to the 1988 or 1980 Summer Olympics, and this is my time. And, if I don't get it now, 84 might be too late, and I wasn't good enough in 76 or whatever. And what's interesting that probably people, remember that here comes the 84 Olympics, and guess what? Soviet Union boycotts this Los Angeles Olympics in 70 or 84. So for those years there, the Soviet Union and U.S. weren't at the same Olympics.
All right, Garrett, final word is yours, buddy.
Well, fun fact about Jimmy Carter, as a kid, he built a pole vaulting pit in his backyard. He was going to practice to be a pole vaulter and had aspirations of doing that, but, never happened. Instead, he became president.
He became a peanut farmer.
Look at that. Learn something new every day on Sports Court. Educating, entertaining. Gentlemen, for any of our listeners who have legal questions on this Thursday in the new year, how can they get a hold of you over at Handy and Handy?
Yeah, Spence, we love coming on here. It's fun to talk about these issues in the world of sports and sports law. We're a personal injury law firm. We help people that have been involved in all kinds of accidents, get them through the process. We'd love to hear from any of you out there. Give us a call at 801-264-6677 or visit our website at handylawutah.com. You can learn about us there and submit your questions.
Larry David says, I have until tomorrow to wish you a happy new year. So this is it. Final time, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll chat next week, okay?
Happy New Year. Take care.
Happy New Year.
Garrett and Preston Handy. Get a hold of them if you have any legal questions. Get a hold of Ryan from the Dish Pros if you care about saving money. Pretty much that simple because you're spending too much money on your wireless situation, on your internet, and on your cable. I can promise you. Save money in the new year by dialing 801-424-DISH. What's going on, Ryan?
Spence, thanks so much. This is an interesting time because we've had so many different customers calling in, and they're just fed up. And they're fed up because what's happening? The prices are having the big increases across the board. We see what happened with fiber. DirecTV did a pretty decent one in October, and then you've got the cable company. And I don't know exactly how that works. Must be different for different people in contracts, but it seems like I've had just an onslaught of my bill went up a lot, and then it went up again a few months later. Listen, this is just part of life, and the way these TV programs, the programmers they're charging more, and then the TV providers have to pay more. So, but Dish does these new customer offers. I'll tell you, these are literally just money in the bank for new customers. You should always take a look at it. It's an easy way to take a massive credit and get free stuff. And this offer right now is going to expire with the extra piece on here in just a few days, where you get Netflix free for 2 years. Now, this is the ad-free version. This isn't the bad one. This is the good one that everybody likes, and that's worth $370 by itself. And yes, Netflix is built into the system, along with YouTube and Amazon Video Prime. So listen, if you compare this side by side, you're going to see a pretty significant decrease in the amount of money you're spending versus like YouTube TV or cable or DirecTV. Call us up and lower your bill. Get the best DVR out there. And I'm serious. I've sat and played with every single different provider out there. And I often like the streaming stuff that's out there. I just shake my head. I'm like, I don't even know why people would pay, even though they're saving maybe $20 a month or $30 a month going through just a straight streaming service. You're losing just a remarkable thing that happened with TV, and that's the DVR. And having a good DVR, especially one that's really fast, fluid, easy to use, access to all that content anywhere with the Dish Anywhere app, take advantage of it. Get Netflix for free. The price is guaranteed for 2 years. It's cheaper than what you're currently paying. We'll throw in dinner at JCW's. If you're worried about your cable bundle, guys, I've got lots of options. I've got tricks where you can keep your existing internet if you want. I'll show you how that works. Or, look at this new provider right now we have. It's the same service I've been using for 2 years, $50 a month, and you get a free TV. Or I've even got fiber in some areas at $35 a month. You got to call up and see what you can do. Save money, upgrade, get the best system out there, and get the best price when you call us. 424-DISH, 801-424-DISH.
All right, there he is, Ryan from the Dish Professionals. Georgia has the ball. They are driving, but Notre Dame has a 23-10 lead with 13:37 left in the fourth. We'll update you on the Sugar Bowl. Big game going on down in the Big Easy. 5 o'clock hour of the show comes your way on the other side on a Thursday right here on ESPN 700. Drive at 5 time on a Thursday afternoon. Commute home on a Thursday starts right now. Hopefully you're still off work. Should be a federal situation. I said earlier between Porter, let me bring you on this because I swear I woke up today. I'm like, oh, it's Monday morning. It very much is not. It's not even close. From December 23rd to January 7th or 8th, no days. You just exist and try to make it through. You shouldn't have to work, hibernate, snack, eat, hang out. Don't label it any days.
I'm with you. I think it's kind of been like this since the pandemic, but in a bigger sense. More specifically, it's I'll even go back further. I feel like you give me Thanksgiving and then all of December and the first week of January to me are like we're on a different wavelength during that time frame.
Humans were they were meant to hibernate during the cold months.
At least chill out and slow down. Your body is especially if you live in a place like this, your body's using more calories just to stay alive and stay warm. We're adjusted to it in a weird way.
I sound like a millennial. Or a Gen Z. The two, the two generational curses upon humanity. But I don't think anybody should work for 7 or 8 weeks. I think everybody stays home, snacks, naps, hangs out with your friends and family.
You're not going to get hate from me on that one.
Well, yeah, you're a millennial, aren't you? Or are you Gen Z?
I don't really know, but
how old are you?
I'm 30 now.
When did you turn 30?
In October.
Oh, that's right. You're 30 years old. I think that makes you a young millennial.
I think so. I'm pretty sure.
So, yeah, I don't mean to sound like a member of your generation, but it just feels like this is the time of year where everybody should be allowed to stay inside, nap, watch old movies, eat, and hang out.
I think ultimately we should be doing more of that all the time, Spence.
Well, that's the whole thing.
Hunting and gathering.
It's called Arrested Development. Look it up. I mean, it's a problem for humanity, but you guys might be onto something.
Problem for capitalism, not humanity.
Neoliberal capitalism.
Thank you.
Deregulate the markets. Nobody gives a rip about this. All right, the Sugar Bowl is going on right now. Notre Dame leads Georgia 23-10. Georgia does have the football. They are in the red zone. Looks like they're on the 13 or 14-yard line. Keep you up to date on this. See if Georgia can make this a game. Still a bit of time left with about 10:51 left in the fourth. Of course, this is the last team in the Final Four of the CFP. Of course, we were all watching over the holiday, and it has led to a ton of conversation. Of course, you would expect on the show today a lot of conversation about the situation down with Arizona State and Texas, that targeting call. I still have not heard anybody debate the other side of it, and if your reasoning is you don't call targeting to essentially allow the other team an opportunity to win, I can't roll with that. I've always been of one mind with this. Any sport, any officiating conversation, if that's targeting with 4 minutes left in the first, that it's targeting with 1 minute left in the fourth or overtime or whatever. You have to call it to the letter of the law. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, which has served me well in sports and in politics and in life. I just kind of diagnose what's in front of me. But it does lead plenty of conversation, and I can't blame people because Texas football is one of the top, 5 brands in the sport, and Arizona State very much is not. And so I can understand people looking at college football with a bit of a skeptical eye today to say, did you want the Texas brand in the Final Four? The answer, by the way, spoiler alert, is yes. Unequivocally yes, whether you're the powers that be in college football, clinging to the powers that you have still as a member of the NCAA, or certainly a powerful television executive, the semifinal matchup of Texas-Ohio State, simply from a brand situation, as opposed to who's the best team, is what you want. And yes, that drives a lot of this, which sucks. Like I said, not a conspiracy theorist at all, but that call seemed to be very, very obvious, at least in my opinion, and I don't understand the reasoning when it comes to the time of the game. That doesn't matter. There are rules in place, and there are laws that ultimately have to be adhered to when it comes to calling things the right way. And then it goes to a review, and they still get it wrong. And it should not have mattered what the call is on the field, because reviewing targeting is different than reviewing other penalties. The motivation for the targeting rule was basically to get the violent hits out of the game, to therefore try to reduce some of these horrible head injuries. And so when they go to review targeting, they review the entire scope of it. But that was a defenseless receiver. It was helmet to helmet. Yes, there was a little face mask to face mask involved. And there's no guarantee that ASU, who all year long has struggled with the kicking game, would have gone down to execute what they needed to in order to kick the field goal to win, but they did not get the opportunity. Now, they had Texas dead to rights. 4th and 13, make one stop and you're good and you're in. And they couldn't get that done. And I don't know, man, if you're a Texas fan today, I don't think you're feeling great about your chances. Ohio State all year long, as far as people that I respect that cover the sport and talk about the sport, seems to have the most momentum for people to believe that when they're at their best is better than everybody else's best. Because certainly one of the key things in any sport that has a playoff situation in order to crown their champ is that you have to be playing the right time at the right time of year. This is not a, hey, get points in a table because you're going to win a soccer league as a result of your body of work. No, you want to be playing the right time at the right time of year. And I don't think any team has the case like Ohio State has. Ryan Day taking a lot of criticism, which is just wild to me, over the course of his body of work. Now, what is interesting about the Ryan Day situation is that he's lost 4 straight to his rival. And they had no business losing to Michigan this year. It was such an eyesore of a football game. Michigan was not good this year after Harbaugh goes to the NFL. They were 8-5, 5-4 in conference play. Ohio State was like a 3-touchdown favorite. Yes, that loss raised a lot of questions. But it's interesting. So Chip Kelly leaves UCLA as their head coach to take over as the play caller at Ohio State. Ryan Day played for Chip once upon a time. And the conversation was, well, they essentially run the same type of system. What's that going to look like? But when they have been able to essentially capitalize on the way that Chip wants to call plays and their offense is ticking the way that it is, and that defense, I mean, my goodness, just violence when it comes to that dismantling of Oregon to start the game. I thought Oregon did a really good job after that ridiculous start when we're all looking around like, wait, another game is over before it's really even started? And that's certainly a fair criticism, but that's not something that is unique or new to the expanded 12-team CFP. We saw blowouts in the 4-team format. We saw blowouts in the BCS format. Blowouts are nothing new because college football is the most unpredictable sport on any level. And I do think if you're an Oregon Ducks fan today, you should feel hard done. Your reward for being the best team in college football and the number 1 seed in this 12-team bracket was potentially the most talented team in the land in the quote-unquote second round. It's your first opportunity to play a game, and you've got to play an Ohio State team that already had a chance to kind of warm up a little bit, and they already dump truck Tennessee, hanging 42 on them. They hang 41 on Oregon. Oregon, like I said, did a pretty good job of coming back to make it interesting. But if I'm an Oregon fan, I'm a little peeved today, and I can totally understand that. Looks like it is 4th down now. 20. Oh wait, they got to stop. Notre Dame with a big stop, 23-10. Looks like Notre Dame's going to take over, and this is another game that might not have a lot of intrigue. Thankfully, Texas, Arizona State did. And I do want to take a moment to give Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham a ton of credit. 3 wins 2 years ago? Herm Edwards left that program for dead. I mean, talent, exodus, potential rule violations, and Kenny Dillingham, who everybody thought was a bright young coach, almost felt like the only one that was going to take on that task. And I suppose if you're a Utah football fan today wondering what next year could look like, you can take solace in that. There are 0 5-star players, including Cam Scatterbo, on the roster. There's not one, okay? And they were able to win the Big 12, year 1 in the Big 12, an unbelievable turnaround. And it really, by the way, is impossible to try to analyze what the Big 12 is going to look like next year. I would imagine when the Vegas lines come out, BYU is going to be one of the favorites. ASU will be one of the favorites. What do you do with your 2 favorites from a year ago, Utah and Oklahoma State, both who are bringing in essentially a brand new roster? I don't know. That's going to be interesting. From a media standpoint, from a Vegas odds-making standpoint, that's going to be fascinating to see what you do with the Big 12. So college football, still this time of year, top-of-mind awareness. And they will change seedings at some point. I thought it was interesting. We caught up with Stormy Bonatoni a little bit earlier, who was on the broadcast for the Rose Bowl. And she does a lot of work with ESPN. She's on a bunch of Big 12 games, Utah and BYU. And ultimately, her assertion is they understand exactly how badly they've failed this sport with this, not just the seeding, but the format, I do think in a way set up the committee to fail. Interesting conversation about, does college football lean into the Rose Bowl being the Super Bowl of college football. Because I don't think you are going, and I think we're learning this in real time, because that's the problem with the chaos with this sport. That's why I talked earlier about being more of a diagnostic approach as opposed to a prognostic approach. Like, there's no way to know how any of this stuff is going to unfold because it's our first time experiencing it with basically a new format, a new sport, and a new business model. So we have to see what the 12-team thing looks like. We have to see how it unfolds. We have to try to understand their pieces of criteria as to why they seeded what teams what. And ultimately, I think we're seeing that there are holes in the system. Those automatic buys, I think, are going to be done away with because in the name of trying, and this is, to me, this is the thing. It's the most delicate dance that the people in charge of this sport have to dance right now because you cannot diminish the importance of the regular season of college football. It's what makes it even more important week in and week out than the NFL. It is the sport where every Saturday feels like do or die. And in the desire to try to maintain it, it almost feels like they overanalyzed it, and they are now in a position where it feels like it is, in a way, being devalued. And yes, I'm thinking about the Oregon situation specifically, where you can win the Big Ten, you can stay clean all year, and your reward in the second round, quote unquote, but the first game you have to play is potentially playing the best team as far as talent goes in the land, in Ohio State. Like, that has to be rectified. And I get the whole, like, well, ASU, Big 12 champ, are they deserving of a bye? Boise State, great story. Ashton Genty, are they worthy of a bye? I think that's fair. And we are in a market with one of the original BCS busters, the University of Utah, way back in the day, TCU, Boise State, and others. So we tend to kind of slant our coverage and also get into a space where we are cheering for the little guy to kind of disrupt the apple cart. But that is the exception, not the rule. More often than not, the teams that are clearly the best teams in college football manifest themselves throughout the course of the year. Georgia right now is on the ropes against Notre Dame, but they kind of have this, like, benefit of the doubt feel, the same way that Saban had when he was at Bama. And, you know, year in and year out, it's not that difficult to tell who the best teams are going to be. But also, if you do away with the potential of one of these smaller schools rising up for an exciting moment, you do away with another dynamic that makes this sport awesome. So there are several layers here, and that's why it's important. That's why I like this format. I've always liked radio. It's not a tweet. It's not a 5-minute TV hit. You can expand the conversation to try to understand everything that's at play. And there are several things that you have to balance. You have to make sure that the regular season remains urgent and immediate and inevitably exciting because that's what keeps people tuned in week and week out. Now, what I do like about the potential of this CFP and this college football playoff season will motivate, namely the SEC, because they're going to cry about their programs that didn't get in, and the Big Ten to move even further away from the rest of the sport. And eventually, I do believe that will be a good thing. I know that sounds weird now, and that is predicated on our two big local programs getting the invite to join that situation. But what that will do is eliminate the matchups between FCS, FBS, smaller schools, bigger schools. You will have brand names week in and week out playing against each other the same way that you have in the NFL. And are there bad teams in the NFL? Certainly. There will be lesser teams in this new iteration of the college football reality when they actually finally make it happen. And then you have to balance things out like competitive balance. And how does a school that doesn't have the endless resources compete with a school like an Alabama, like a Texas, like a whoever has the most powerful boosters, the T. Boone Pickens of the world? How do other schools that don't have that keep up? But it's the same thing that they try to balance in pro sports with salary cap, the ability to unionize, collectively bargain, and make sure that you have revenue sharing. And they do have revenue sharing in the sport, right? But conference by conference, ironically enough, because of BYU's partial share, year 2 in the Big 12, Utah football will get a bigger check from BYU's win over Colorado in the Alamo Bowl than BYU will. I don't know if you realize that. So there are several layers here as far as how to get this thing going in the right direction. In the meantime, I guess you do the best to enjoy the games, and hopefully you have good games. And right now, Notre Dame is driving up 23-10 with 6:33 left in the fourth quarter. So it looks like the Irish are going to hold on. All right, I want to tell you about my friends at Prize Picks, best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. It's really easy to do. If you've ever wanted to kind of get involved in the space, but you don't want to deal with learning about lines and over-unders and spreads and all that stuff, all you do here is pick 2 players, then pick more or less on their stat projections. So if you're going to do a Jazz game, Larry Markkinen more or less than 20.5 points, Colin Sexton more or less than 2.5 steals, something like that. It's really easy, giving away free money. Download the app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly. After you play your first $5 lineup, Prize Picks run your game. You know, on the scale of Andy Bernard deep cuts, this actually, I would say it's somewhere in the middle. It's not one of the more popular DMB tracks. It was a radio hit at some point. So I would say, because we do adhere to the Andy Bernard deep cuts only Dave Matthews Band rule on the show, right. I would say this is somewhere mid-tier.
I usually go with the, is it on my radio play? Because here at ESPN 700, we just have the library for X96 for 101.5, blah, blah, blah. So if it's on there, it's probably not a deep cut, which I think is fair.
All right, I can ride with that. Shout out to Dave, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Julia Roberts did the speech.
Oh, really?
She was the one that inducted them into the Hall of Fame. You're going to want to watch that. I know you're a big fan.
That was probably a cool moment for you, though.
Well, I mean, it's Sunday night. There's not a lot of sports going on, right?
Did you cry?
Maybe. It was emotional. I'm not going to lie. And to have Dave and Tribe the same night, I mean, that was right down my alley. A lot of text messages congratulating me because really it's about me. Last night was about me.
Dave and Tribe on the same night. It's, if I would have seen that, if I would have known that was a thing, I would have sent you a text.
Well, I think I deserve some credit for both of them being inducted the same night, bringing the awareness to the market about who they are.
At least this market.
So you didn't watch last night because you were recovering from biking 70 miles and running 30 or something.
26.3, to be very exact.
Are you sore?
I was. Yesterday was bad.
Yeah.
Yesterday I did nothing but watch football. I did go to the store. That was it. But today I'm doing all right. Stretched out and feeling a lot better.
I will be on television tonight with Dave Fox. You know what I like about Stormy? Stormy Bonatoni joined us earlier. She has 4 Emmys, but she didn't brag about it. She gave credit to her team.
Right.
And Fox has 2, and he's never said anything other than I deserve these myself.
It's a fair observation. She didn't say a thing about her Pelotons, she seems like a Peloton gal.
Yeah.
So, it's par for the course.
Yeah, Dave Fox could learn some humility from Stormy, is what I'm saying.
I think so.
It is a quiet night on the local scene, but the Utah Hockey Club is in action. They're up in Calgary. That's on ESPN Plus at 7 o'clock. Some decent NBA action. Of course, you can watch the final portion of the Sugar Bowl to see which team will get in. Spoiler alert. I think we know who it is. So enjoy your Thursday night. No NFL football tonight, but the NFL will have a couple of games on Saturday to make up for the lack of Thursday night action. All right, Craig Smith Coach's Show coming up next was a rough introduction into the Big 12 for Utah men's basketball. Spoiler alert, it's going to be a long year for the Utah men's basketball program. Big 12 basketball in and of itself is really, really fun to watch, but a couple of straight losses. Iowa, not a conference game. They were at Baylor, number 25 team in the country, and they just got dog-walked 81-56. They're going to be up against Texas Tech in a couple of days, and it is a gauntlet, including at Iowa State next week. All right, a Thursday that feels like a Monday is not. It is a Thursday, and tomorrow is literally a Friday that will feel like a Tuesday. But, Porter, what comes our way on a legitimately Friday show?
Yeah, we'll finish off the short week talking a bunch of football, reacting to the CFP, and looking ahead to the NFL weekend as well. Stevenson Sylvester drops by the program. Tony Parks stops by the program. You can hit any base with Tony. JB Long, the voice of the LA Rams, and, of course, college football guy as well. And then we'll finish off the Friday with a Friday staple, Chris Kamrani in studio with you for a full hour.
Nice. Little CK in the new year. Enjoy that. It'll be a lot of fun. All right, that'll do it. Craig Smith Coach's Show coming up. Special thank you to Tim Bontemps, Craig Bowler, Jack Gordon, Monson, and Stormy Bonatoni. If you miss any of the show if you miss any of the sound from the show or just the show, period, website's an option. It's ESPN700sports.com. Download our station app. Take us on the go. ESPN 700 app, App Store, Google Play Store. Finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon, we have a podcast page, and we would like your support. It actually helps us. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. Wherever you get shows, subscribe, rate, review, say nice things. In the comments, give us all the stars. You will be eternally blessed. He's Porter. I'm Spence saying good night. Have a great Thursday evening. We'll talk to you on a Friday Drive right here on ESPN 700.